My husband of 7 years texted me that he was leaving me for my best friend of 14 years. But the real knife in the back was the second half of the message. It was a fabricated confession framing me for federal treason. I did not cry. I simply replied, "Good luck." Canceled every credit card in his name, changed every lock before sunset, and waited for the FBI raid that came at dawn. I would love to know where this story finds you tonight and how old you are. Drop a comment below. You are listening to Sarah Told Stories, so make sure you subscribe so you never miss a moment like this. Let us get into the story. The heavy tread of tactical boots against my pristine Alexandria hardwood disturbed the quiet Wednesday morning. Kevlar brushed against the hallway walls I had painted just last spring. Federal agents moved through my kitchen with practiced efficiency. One slid my primary work laptop into an anti-static evidence bag, sealing it with a sharp synthetic zip. Another pulled my federal compliance ledgers from the mahogany bookshelf. I stood by the marble island holding a ceramic mug of black coffee, watching the government dismantle the quiet life I had built. The raid was precision theater, a choreographed display of state power meant to intimidate. But the real performance had begun exactly 12 hours earlier. Tuesday evening carried the crisp chill of late October in Virginia. I sat in the dim light of my home office, reviewing a defense contractor expenditure report. The glow of the monitor cast long shadows across the room. My phone screen illuminated on the desk. A text from Derek. My husband rarely typed paragraphs, unless he wanted to buy something we did not need. He was a man of brief, impatient demands. This message was different. It read like a script prepared by a lawyer. Faith, I cannot do this anymore. I found the hidden ledgers. I know about the $2.4 million you siphoned from the logistics firm. I am terrified of what you will do to keep me quiet. I am leaving for Cancun tonight with Paige. Do not try to find us. I stared at the glowing pixels. Paige, my closest friend, the woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, the woman who drank Pinot Noir on my patio every Sunday and listened to my frustrations about work. She was currently boarding an international flight with my husband. A different wife might have thrown the phone against the wall. A different woman might have collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. I set the phone down face up on the glass desk. My pulse maintained its steady rhythm. My hands remained perfectly still. As a federal contracts compliance auditor, my entire career revolved around dissecting anomalies. I find the money people try to hide. Derek sending a highly detailed text was an anomaly. Men fleeing in the name of illicit love do not list specific dollar amounts in their goodbye messages. They do not document their exact fears in a digital format for the cloud to store forever. He was not running away in a panic. He was establishing a paper trail. He was framing me for embezzlement. I closed my eyes and let the reality of my marriage wash over me. For 7 years, I had been the silent architect of his life. Derek ran a defense logistics firm that only stayed afloat because I spent my weekends untangling his sloppy accounting. I subsidized his country club memberships, his tailored suits, and his leased sports cars with my lucrative government salary. I built his foundation while he took the credit, and now he was using that same foundation to bury me. Memories of Paige began to shift under this new, harsh light. For months, she had been asking subtle questions about my auditing schedules. She would lean over my kitchen counter sipping wine, asking when I would be out of town for federal conferences or which servers I monitored during the week. I had thought she was taking an interest in my stressful career. Now, the sickening truth settled into my chest. She was gathering intelligence. They had been planning this exit for a long time. I turned back to my monitors. My fingers found the mouse. The quiet, rhythmic click echoed off the walls. I bypassed the standard login portals, utilizing my high-level security clearance to access our joint accounts. Derek always assumed my government salary merely paid the mortgage. He never understood the layers of encryption protecting the actual wealth I had generated and managed over a decade. Click. 75% of our liquid assets, the money I had solely earned, diverted into an independent ghost-rooted account, invisible to standard civil inquiries. Click. His supplementary platinum card, currently resting in his leather wallet somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, shifted to deactivated for suspected fraud. Click. I severed his digital access to the smart home grid, the vehicle registry, and my personal cloud servers. In less than 4 minutes, I reduced a man accustomed to effortless luxury to a financial ghost. He would land in Mexico with nothing but the lint in his pockets, and a woman who was about to realize her meal ticket just bounced. I picked up my phone, navigating back to his elaborate confession note. My thumb hovered over the glass for a fraction of a second. I typed 2 words. Good luck. I pressed send and tossed the device onto the sofa. I did not pack a bag. I did not call my sister to cry. I called a 24-hour emergency locksmith. Less than an hour later, a tired man in denim overalls was drilling fresh deadbolts into my front and back doors. The smell of brass shavings and fresh oil lingered in the foyer. I paid him in cash, locked the heavy deadbolts, and walked through my quiet house. The silence felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a lonely marriage. It was the silence of a battlefield, just before the first shot is fired. I went to sleep, secure in the fortress I had locked down. But a fortress only keeps out the people who do not have the legal right to break the door down. The sun had barely breached the horizon when the splintering crack of a battering ram hit the front frame, pulling me abruptly back to the present. The heavy oak door gave way with a sickening crunch. The feds were here. A tall man in a dark suit stepped over my ruined threshold. He did not look like local law enforcement. He carried the weary, hardened posture of a federal agent who dealt exclusively with high-stakes treason. He flashed a gold shield catching the morning light. "Department of Defense," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Faith Myers, we have a warrant for your property and your digital assets." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The ceramic was warm against my palms, grounding me in the moment. I did not ask why they were there. Doing so would imply ignorance, and ignorance is a vulnerability. I simply nodded toward the home office. The lead agent studied my face. He was searching for panic. He was searching for the erratic behavior of a woman whose husband had just uncovered her multi-million-dollar crime. He found nothing but the calm, detached gaze of an auditor calculating her next move. Derek and his cowardly text were merely the fuse. The real fire had just arrived in my kitchen, and I was going to use it to burn his false narrative to the ground. The man standing in my foyer introduced himself as Agent Collins from the Department of Defense. Local police handle domestic disputes and petty theft. The Department of Defense handles national security threats. The distinction hung in the cold morning air, heavy and suffocating. Collins gestured toward my living room, inviting me to sit in my own house. I walked to the ivory sofa, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood, and set my coffee mug on the glass table. Collins took the leather armchair opposite me. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked my every micro-expression. He was a hunter, waiting for the prey to bolt. I did not bolt. I crossed my legs and met his gaze, projecting the calm, sterile demeanor of a woman who had spent a decade auditing high-ranking federal contractors. Behind him, his team worked with terrifying efficiency. They unplugged my dual monitors, they tagged my backup hard drives, The sharp, tearing sound of evidence tape echoed through the open floor plan. Collins did not ask about my marriage. He placed a thick manila folder on the glass table between us. He stated that $2.4 million had been drained from Derek's logistics firm over the past 72 hours. I nodded, slowly, acknowledging the number. But then Collins flipped the folder open and the ground beneath me shifted. The money was not the crime. The money was the payment. Collins revealed that the firm's secure servers had been breached. Highly classified military supply chain schematics detailing troop deployment logistics across Eastern Europe were missing. Those schematics had been sold to an offshore procurement vendor based in the Cayman Islands. I looked down at the printed dossier. My eyes scanned the corporate registration documents. The proxy trust listed as the primary shareholder jumped off the page. It was a shell corporation name Page had drunkenly joked about creating during a girls' trip to Napa 3 years ago. My throat tightened, though I swallowed the reaction before it reached my face. Page was not a homewrecker. She was a seasoned corporate spy. The realization locked into place with the cold precision of a safe door clicking shut. 14 years of friendship evaporated into thin air. Every shared secret, every weekend brunch, every sympathetic ear she lent me when I complained about my exhausting federal clearance protocols. It was all a calculated extraction of intelligence. She targeted me, befriended me, and eventually slept with my husband, all to gain access to the defense contracts my husband managed and I audited. She was running a long con, and Derek was nothing but a gullible, arrogant pawn who handed her the keys. I shifted my gaze back to Collins. I asked to see the search warrant. He slid a piece of heavy stock paper across the table. I read through the legalese, my eyes scanning the dense paragraphs with the speed of a seasoned compliance officer. Near the bottom of the second page, a specific string of numbers caught my attention. My personal router IP address. The numeric signature was listed as the origin point for the data breach. The stolen schematics had been downloaded and transmitted directly from my home network. A memory surfaced, sharp and stinging. 3 weeks ago, I was attending a federal compliance summit in Denver. Derek called me complaining that our home internet was dropping his video calls. He told me he hired a private technician to upgrade the basement server rack while I was away. He did not hire a technician. He planted a digital backdoor. He routed the stolen classified files through my secure firewall, establishing a flawless digital blood trail pointing straight to my desk. He provided the feds with a neat, undeniable narrative. The brilliant auditor wife bypassed the security she was hired to protect, stole the documents, and sold them for millions. Collins leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He informed me that they received an anonymous tip late last night, a frantic message from a husband claiming he had just discovered his wife's treason and was fleeing the country in fear for his life. Derek had played his part perfectly. He provided the motive, Paige provided the extraction, and my router provided the proof. I looked at Collins. "You think I sold military secrets to my best friend?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. Collins did not smile. "I think the data transfer originated from your IP address, Mrs. Myers. I think your husband is currently on a flight out of United States jurisdiction, and I think you have the exact technical expertise required to pull this off." He stood up, signaling the end of the interrogation. He did not read me my Miranda rights. They were not arresting me today. They were letting me twist in the wind while they built a bulletproof federal indictment. But the bureaucratic execution began immediately. Collins handed me a formal letter bearing the seal of my agency. I broke the wax stamp and read the single paragraph. I was suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full national security investigation. My security clearance, the foundation of my career and my identity, was revoked. Next came the financial strike. Collins informed me that a federal judge had signed an order freezing every joint asset, investment portfolio, and bank account attached to my Social Security number. The government was cutting off my oxygen. They expected me to panic, to hire a desperate lawyer to make a mistake. The agents filed out of my house in a silent, organized procession. Collins was the last to leave. He paused at the ruined doorframe, advising me not to leave the state of Virginia. Then he stepped out into the crisp autumn air, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of my home. I stood in the center of the living room. The spaces where my laptops used to sit were now just empty, rectangular dust outlines on the mahogany wood. The severity of the situation settled over me like a suffocating, weighted blanket. I was not just facing a messy divorce. I was facing decades in a federal penitentiary for treason. The people I loved had conspired to lock me in a cage for the rest of my life. My father raised me in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He was a man of few words, a mechanic who taught me that a broken engine is just a puzzle waiting to be solved. He taught me to never cry over spilled oil, but to find the leak and fix the valve. I took a deep breath, inhaling the lingering scent of the agent's synthetic tactical gear. I walked into my master bedroom and knelt inside the walk-in closet. I pulled up the corner of the heavy wool carpet, exposing a loose floorboard I had meticulously sawed and fitted 5 years ago. I reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a fireproof lockbox. Inside rested a prepaid burner phone and a thick stack of vacuum-sealed $100 bills. It was an emergency cache I built slowly over the years, a paranoid auditor's insurance policy against catastrophic system failures. The system had failed. The people I trusted had weaponized my own life against me. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed stripping away my devices and my badge would render me helpless. They forgot that the tools do not make the auditor. The mind does. I cracked the seal on the burner phone, staring at the blank, glowing screen. I was going to dismantle their lie piece by piece, and I was going to start by hunting down the phantom who orchestrated it. The departure of the federal agents left my house feeling like a hollowed-out shell. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Virginia morning traffic. I needed a defense attorney. Not just any lawyer, but a shark who specialized in high-stakes federal treason. I picked up my burner phone and dialed the direct line of a prominent legal fixer in Richmond, a man I had once helped exonerate during a complex defense contractor audit. The phone rang twice before his secretary answered. She put me on a brief hold. When he finally picked up, his tone was brittle. He informed me that his firm had a sudden conflict of interest and could not represent me. He hung up before I could ask any questions. I called 3 more top-tier defense firms across the state. The result was identical. Unavailability, conflicts of interest, polite but firm rejections. A chilling realization began to form in my mind. The federal asset freeze was only the first layer of my punishment. The second layer was a coordinated starvation of my resources. The government did not work this fast to poison the private legal well. Someone else was salting the earth. That someone was Audrey. Derek inherited his cowardice from his father, but his arrogance was a direct gift from his mother. Audrey traced her lineage back to the original colonial settlements of the Commonwealth. She viewed the modern tech-focused corridors of Northern Virginia as a playground for her generational entitlement. She was a woman who never raised her voice because she paid other people to scream for her. I knew exactly where she was and what she was doing. It was Wednesday afternoon. Audrey was holding her weekly luncheon at the elite Alexandria Country Club. I could picture the scene with vivid clarity. crystal glasses clinking softly, the smell of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Audrey sitting at the center table wearing her signature pearls, dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. She was executing a masterful performance, spinning a narrative that painted her son as a tragic victim. She was telling the wives of judges, politicians, and corporate executives that I was a deranged, controlling woman. She whispered that my stressful federal job had broken my mind. She planted the seed that I had embezzled millions from her sweet, oblivious son and driven him out of the country in sheer terror. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. By controlling the social narrative, Audrey severed my professional network. The elite circles of Virginia operate on reputation. Audrey was actively ensuring that any lawyer, colleague, or friend who stood by me would face social and financial exile. She was building a wall around me, isolating me, so that the federal indictment would crush me without resistance. She expected me to react like a cornered animal. She expected me to show up at the country club, screaming and throwing wine, proving her rumors true. I did not give her the satisfaction. I maintained a terrifyingly calm silence. I showered, dressed in a sharp, tailored trench coat, and drove my remaining vehicle to a bustling artisanal coffee shop in the heart of the city. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. The aroma of roasted espresso beans and warm pastries filled the air. This was a place Derek and I used to frequent on Sunday mornings. The barista, a young woman who used to greet me by name, suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. Several patrons sitting near the window lowered their voices. I saw the wife of a prominent local judge lean across her table to whisper to her companion, her eyes darting toward me. The whisper campaign was already saturating the town. I was the radioactive wife. I ignored their stares. I walked to a small table in the back corner, sat down, and pulled a thick, unmarked envelope from my leather tote. A man in a nondescript gray sweater sat across from me. He was a dark web proxy broker, a contact I knew from my days tracing illicit defense funds. He did not care about country club gossip. He cared about untraceable currency. I opened the envelope. My fingers moved with mechanical precision. I pulled out the crisp, vacuum-sealed bills from my emergency reserve. 100, 200, 500. I meticulously counted the currency right there in the open coffee shop. The whispering patrons watched in barely concealed shock, expecting me to hide in shame. Instead, I sat in the sunlight, funding my own shadow war. I slid $3,000 across the wooden table. The broker nodded, palmed the cash, and handed me a small encrypted flash drive containing the access keys to a secure offshore server. He stood and left without a word. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked out of the shop with my head held high. Let them stare. Let Audrey spin her venomous fairy tales. Social capital was an illusion. Data was the only truth. I returned to my fortified house and locked the deadbolts. I set up my burner laptop on the kitchen island. I inserted the encrypted drive and booted the secure server. I was invisible to the federal monitors. Now it was time to hunt. I focused all my investigative energy on Paige. In my mind, she was the undisputed mastermind. She was the seasoned corporate spy who had infiltrated my life, seduced my weak husband, and orchestrated the theft of classified military schematics. Derek was merely the idiot who handed her the access codes. She was the one who profited. She was the one holding the missing $2.4 million. My anger narrowed into a razor-sharp beam aimed directly at her. Months ago, during a routine preliminary audit of Derek's logistics firm, my instincts had flared. His accounting was unusually sloppy, even for him. Anticipating a future compliance headache, I had silently cloned a ghost copy of his entire corporate ledger onto a secure external drive. The feds had seized my primary machines, but they did not know about the ghost copy, buried in the lining of my winter coat. I uploaded the ghost ledgers to the burner server. Streams of financial data cascaded down the screen. Rows of transactions, payroll records, and vendor invoices filled the dark monitor. To an untrained eye, it was a meaningless wall of numbers. To me, it was a living, breathing map of human behavior. I began tracing the payments sent to Paige's offshore procurement vendor. I cross-referenced the dates of the transactions with her travel schedules, her social media posts, and the days she had visited my home. I was looking for the digital heartbeat of her espionage. I spent hours dissecting the false invoices she submitted to Derek's firm. I found the exact moment the military schematics were packaged and exported through my compromised router. She was brilliant, leaving almost no forensic footprints. But every predator leaves a shadow when they move in the light. I poured a second cup of black coffee and leaned closer to the screen. I was convinced that following Paige's vendor accounts would lead me straight to the stolen cash. I isolated the transfer nodes. I ran a decryption algorithm on the routing paths. I watched the progress bar crawl across the monitor, waiting for the offshore Cayman accounts to illuminate with the missing millions. The algorithm chimed. The results populated the screen. I set my coffee mug down so hard the dark liquid sloshed over the rim. The numbers did not make sense. I ran the trace again. The result was identical. Paige had indeed stolen the classified schematics. She had moved the data offshore through her shell company. But the $2.4 million in cash had never crossed international borders. The financial theft and the data theft were two completely separate events occurring on entirely different timelines. Paige had taken the secrets, but she had not taken the money. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I stared at the blinking cursor. If Paige did not take the millions, who did? I pulled up the firewall logs from Derek's secure servers, narrowing the search parameters to the exact moments the money was drained. I was no longer hunting a single spy in Mexico. I was hunting a ghost in my own backyard. And as the routing numbers resolved into a domestic Virginia IP address, I realized the betrayal was far darker than a simple affair. The encrypted Cayman server stood before me like a monolithic digital wall. My decryption algorithms battered against the proxy firewalls, yielding nothing but denied access prompts. The burner laptop hummed a low, steady vibration under my palms. I stared at the cascading lines of rejected code. The offshore vendor account was an impenetrable fortress, designed by someone who understood federal tracing methodologies just as well as I did. Paige had woven a masterful web. She masked the final destination of the transferred files with overlapping proxy bounces across 6 different international jurisdictions. My eyes burned from staring at the harsh blue light of the monitor. The trail had gone cold. I leaned back in the ergonomic mesh chair, rubbing my temples. Frustration threatened to cloud my focus. When an auditor hits a dead end, the instinct is to push harder against the locked door. I closed my eyes and let the present dissolve. The sterile smell of heated electronics faded. The scent of damp pine needles and crisp autumn air rushed into my memory. I was 12 years old again, standing in the dense, frosted underbrush of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The early morning mist clung to the valleys like torn cobwebs. My boots crunched softly against the frozen earth. Beside me stood my father. He was a quiet man, with grease-stained hands and a pragmatic view of the universe. He held a weathered hunting rifle, studying the forest floor with intense concentration. We had been tracking a wounded buck for 3 miles. The animal had vanished into a thicket of thorns, leaving no visible prints on the rocky terrain. I had wanted to turn back, claiming the deer was gone forever. My father knelt, pointing a calloused finger at a single overturned leaf. A tiny, dark speck rested on the pale underside. They always leave a trail of blood, Faith. You just have to know what color to look for. He taught me that day that prey does not vanish. It merely changes its pattern. If you lose the footprints, you look for broken twigs. If you lose the physical path, you look for the behavioral habits. You analyze where the animal feels safe, where it stops to rest. You stop looking for the target and start looking for the disturbance it creates in the environment. I opened my eyes, returning to the silent kitchen in Alexandria. The glowing screen waited for my next command. I had been attacking this problem like a blunt instrument. I was looking for the destination of the stolen cash. I was trying to follow the money itself. The money was the deer, and it had disappeared into the digital brush. I needed to stop hunting the currency and start hunting the behavior. I needed to find the blood trail. I placed my hands back on the keyboard. I cleared the financial routing queries and opened the raw system access logs for Derek's logistics firm. Instead of tracking dollar amounts, I filtered the data by user login timestamps. I isolated every instance where Page's offshore vendor initiated a handshake protocol with Derek's secure servers over the past 8 months. Thousands of rows of chronological data flooded the screen. I scrolled through the dates, ignoring the file sizes and focusing entirely on the timing. A rhythm began to emerge from the chaos. It was subtle at first, but as I highlighted the specific entries, the pattern crystallized into an undeniable fact. Page's shell company only penetrated the secure network once a week. The access always occurred on a Tuesday afternoon, precisely between 2 and 4 o'clock. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the timestamps with my index finger. The precision was staggering. Spies do not operate on a rigid, predictable schedule unless the environment forces them to do so. Page chose that specific 2-hour window for a tactical reason. I cross-referenced those dates with Derek's personal calendar, synced to my hidden cloud backup. Every single Tuesday afternoon, Derek's schedule was blocked out for a standing family obligation. It was the exact time Audrey hosted her weekly bridge club at the Alexandria Country Club. My mother-in-law ruled her social circle with an iron grip, and she demanded her son's attendance at these luncheons to parade his success in front of the local elite. Derek complained about it constantly, but he never missed a session. He feared Audrey's quiet wrath far more than he cared about his business operations. During those 2 hours, Derek was surrounded by wealthy retirees sipping iced tea, oblivious to his phone or his laptop. His secure devices were either left unguarded in his office or sitting unattended in his jacket pocket at the club. Paige knew this. She had sat on my patio drinking wine, listening to me vent about Audrey's suffocating weekly bridge clubs. She extracted that seemingly trivial family dynamic and weaponized it. She knew Tuesday afternoon was the one window where Derek was universally distracted and his network was undefended. The brilliance of the corporate espionage was chilling, but it also revealed a critical vulnerability. I dug deeper into the Tuesday access logs. I parsed the raw packet data, analyzing the origin of the network requests. Paige routed her connections through the Cayman servers to mask her location. But as I scrutinized the metadata of a specific session from 3 weeks ago, I found my pebble. It was a microscopic anomaly buried in millions of lines of code. A single glowing line of text. A handshake echo. When Paige initiated the data transfer, an automated verification ping bounced off the offshore server, confirming the connection. That ping did not originate from the Caribbean. It originated from a localized internet service provider right here in Virginia. Paige was not hacking the system from a remote island. She was sitting in a local cafe or a rented apartment executing the data theft from my own time zone while Derek ate finger sandwiches with his mother. I captured the localized IP address, saving it to a secure, encrypted folder. I had the origin point of the data breach. I could hand this single piece of evidence to Agent Collins and prove the espionage occurred on domestic soil, bypassing my router entirely. But as I stared at the Tuesday timestamps, A much darker realization crept up my spine. I opened a second window, pulling up the fraudulent financial transfers. The dates the $2.4 million were drained from the logistics firm. I aligned the financial log next to the data access log. They did not match. The military schematics were stolen on Tuesday afternoons, but the massive cash withdrawals occurred on Thursday nights, often past midnight. My breath caught in my throat. I ran the comparative analysis again, verifying the digital signatures. The results remained identical. The two crimes were not synchronized. They were executed using different administrative protocols, different encrypted gateways, and entirely different behavioral patterns. Page accessed the servers on Tuesdays to steal the logistics data. But whoever drained the bank accounts operated in the dead of night on Thursdays. A seasoned corporate spy running a meticulous extraction protocol would never separate the data theft from the financial theft by 48 hours. Doing so doubles the risk of detection. Page was far too intelligent to make such a reckless tactical error. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The narrative the feds believed, the narrative Derek tried to establish in his fabricated text message, was fundamentally flawed. Page took the classified military secrets. She orchestrated the espionage and seduced my husband to get the clearance codes. But she did not take the money. I sat back in the silence of my fortified kitchen, the glow of the dual monitors illuminating my face in the dark. The Cayman accounts were a dead end for the currency because the currency never traveled there. Page had her prize, but the millions of dollars stolen from the company ledger were still unaccounted for. If Page did not take the cash, then someone else did. Someone who knew Derek's schedule just as intimately. Someone who possessed the authority to authorize massive domestic wire transfers under the cover of darkness. The money was not sitting in a sunny resort in Mexico waiting to fund a scandalous new life. The money had never left Virginia, and the person who took it was still out there, letting me take the fall. 2,000 miles south of the cold Virginia autumn, the Yucatan Peninsula baked under an oppressive tropical sun. The lobby of the exclusive Cancun resort smelled of expensive coconut oil and sea salt. Ceiling fans the size of helicopter rotors chopped the humid air above the imported marble floors. Derek stood at the mahogany concierge desk wearing a linen shirt unbuttoned to his chest. He tapped his fingers impatiently against the polished wood. He was projecting the image of a titan taking a much-needed vacation, a man who had successfully outsmarted his boring wife and secured his fortune. Paige had sent him down to the lobby with a specific demand. She wanted to charter a private catamaran for the afternoon, complete with a catered champagne lunch and a string quartet. It was a lavish request costing nearly $10,000 for a few hours on the water. Derek did not hesitate to accommodate her. He pulled his heavy metal platinum card from his leather wallet and slid it across the counter. He offered the attendant a smug, brilliant smile. He anticipated the subservient nod of a hospitality worker, bowing to his superior wealth. The attendant swiped the heavy card through the terminal. The machine processed the magnetic strip. A sharp, flat beep echoed from the small speaker. The attendant frowned politely. "I am sorry, sir. The transaction was declined." Derek scoffed, waving his hand in annoyance. "Run it again. Your machine is probably acting up." The attendant swiped the card a second time. Another flat beep. The young man looked up, his professional smile faltering into a tight grimace. "Sir, the system is generating a hard hold. It says the account has been deactivated due to suspected fraud. I am instructed to confiscate the plastic." The color drained from Derek's face. He snatched the card back before the attendant could reach for it. He pulled out a secondary corporate card issued under his defense logistics firm and shoved it toward the terminal. He demanded the man run the alternative account. The attendant complied. The machine beeped again. Denied. Suspected fraud. A cold sweat broke out across the back of Derek's neck, ruining the crisp linen shirt. His pulse hammered in his temples. He backed away from the desk, mumbling an excuse about calling his bank to clear a simple security hold. He turned and walked briskly toward the private elevators. His confident stride dissolved into a frantic, nervous shuffle. He rode the glass elevator up to the penthouse, gripping the brass railing for support. He just needed to talk to Paige. She had the access keys to the offshore vendor accounts. She could transfer the liquid cash to cover their expenses until he untangled the mess with his stateside banks. He keyed open the heavy double doors of the penthouse suite. He called her name, stepping into the vast, sunlit living room overlooking the turquoise ocean. Silence answered him. The sheer white curtains billowed inward, catching the ocean breeze. Derek walked toward the master bedroom, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bed was perfectly made. He tore open the walk-in closet. The cedar shelves were entirely bare. Every piece of Paige's designer luggage was gone. The silk dresses, the expensive shoes, the wide-brimmed hats she had worn just yesterday had vanished. He stumbled toward the room safe tucked behind a framed painting. The steel door hung wide open. It was hollow. Her passport was missing. Her emergency cash was missing. Even the expensive diamond tennis bracelet he had bought her at the airport duty-free shop had disappeared. Derek collapsed onto the edge of the mattress. The tropical heat suddenly felt like a freezing vice grip around his chest. He was stranded in a foreign country with no money, no return ticket, and a hotel bill accumulating thousands of dollars by the hour. The illusion of his grand escape shattered, leaving him alone with the terrifying reality that he was not the mastermind. He was the mark. While Derek suffocated in paradise, I sat in a vinyl booth at a desolate diner overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. The sky outside the grease-stained windows was the color of wet iron. Rain lashed against the glass, blurring the view of the churning gray water. The diner smelled of stale coffee and fried potatoes. It was an establishment forgotten by the modern world, making it the perfect location for a quiet conversation. The bell above the entrance jingled. Agent Collins stepped inside, shaking the rain from his dark trench coat. He scanned the empty room, spotted me in the back corner, and slid into the booth opposite my seat. He did not order anything from the waitress hovering near the counter. "You requested this meeting, Mrs. Myers," Collins said, his voice low and devoid of pleasantries. "You understand that your suspended status means any communication between us is technically off the record." "I understand perfectly," I replied, sliding a thick printed dossier across the scratched Formica table. "I am not here to ask for my job back. I am here to do yours." Collins raised an eyebrow. He flipped open the dossier. I had spent the entire night organizing the data I pulled from my burner server. The pages contained the access logs, the localized internet service provider pings, and the behavioral analysis of the Tuesday afternoon data breaches. I watched his eyes dart across the printed spreadsheets. His trained federal mind absorbed the anomalies exactly as I intended. I explained that Paige's offshore procurement vendor was a front. I pointed to the highlighted row of code proving the classified military schematics were transferred from a local Virginia network bouncing off a proxy to appear international. "You think your best friend is a corporate spy?" Collins asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to sharply focused. "I know she is," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "She targeted Derek because his administrative security protocols were weak. She initiated the transfers from local coffee shops while he was attending his mother's weekly bridge club. She knew his schedule. She knew he left his devices unattended." Collins leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "This is an interesting theory, but it does not exonerate you. Your router is still ground zero for the data export. Your husband named you as the thief. A clever hacker could fake a localized ping to frame someone else. He was testing me. He was waiting to see if I would crack under the pressure of circumstantial doubt. I did not crack. I reached for a napkin resting under my coffee cup. The thin paper was stained with a brown ring of dried espresso. I took a black ink pen from my purse and uncapped it. I drew a quick, precise schematic of my home network architecture on the stained paper. I mapped out the primary firewall, the secondary node, and the exact digital entry point of the unauthorized backdoor Derek had installed. I drew a harsh intersecting line representing the date and time the backdoor was coded into the system. Then I slid a secondary piece of paper across the table. It was a printed copy of my federal travel vouchers from 3 weeks ago. It included flight manifests, hotel receipts, and digital keycard swipes from a secure government facility in Denver. I tapped the tip of my pen against the coffee-stained napkin. The back door was hard-coded into my router physically on a Thursday morning, I said, holding his gaze. My flight to Denver departed on Wednesday evening. The keycard swipes prove I was inside a federal building 2,000 miles away when the unauthorized port was opened in my basement. I could not have installed the back door. Derek was the only person with physical access to the house during that window. Colin stared at the napkin. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain drumming against the diner roof. He was a professional investigator, confronting an undeniable piece of physical logic. The timeline was ironclad. He slowly folded the napkin and placed it inside his suit pocket. "You are building a compelling argument," he admitted, his voice softer than before. "I will assign a cyber unit to verify the hotel logs and the routing timestamps." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "But this is not enough to drop the treason charges. You are proving how the door was unlocked. You are not proving who walked through it. If Paige took the schematics, she had a buyer. If she had a buyer, she got paid. Where is the $2.4 million that vanished from the company accounts?" I looked out the window at the dark water. The question hovered in the air, demanding an answer I did not yet possess. Collins was right. A brilliant timeline was merely a defense. It was not a weapon. To secure my freedom, I needed to hand the federal government the missing millions. "I know the money is not in Mexico," I said, turning back to him. "And I am going to find it." Collins stood up, tossing a $5 bill onto the table to cover my coffee. "Do not take too long, Faith. The grand jury convenes in 10 days. If we do not have the money or the spy by then, the indictment comes down on you." He walked out of the diner, disappearing into the freezing rain. I sat alone in the booth, listening to the wind howl against the glass. I had successfully shifted the interrogation dynamic, turning a hostile agent into a cautious ally. But the real battle was just beginning. If Paige was busy selling military secrets, she did not have time to launder domestic corporate funds. The second parasite was still out there feeding on the carcass of my husband's firm. And to find them, I would have to bait a trap using the only asset I had left: my own home. I stood up, pulled my trench coat tight against the chill, and walked out to my car, unaware that someone had already been paid to ensure I never made it to the grand jury hearing. The drive back from the desolate Chesapeake Bay diner was a blur of sweeping windshield wipers and endless gray highway. The storm battered my car, but my mind was entirely focused on the digital battlefield awaiting me. I parked inside my secure garage and engaged the heavy deadbolts behind me. The house was freezing. I walked straight to the kitchen island and woke the burner laptop from its sleep state. The screen cast a pale blue glow across the dark granite countertops, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. I had promised Agent Collins the missing money. Now I had to deliver it. I opened the ghost ledgers I had cloned from Derek's defense logistics firm. The offshore Cayman accounts were a brilliant distraction. I knew Paige took the classified military defense schematics, but the $2.4 million in liquid operational capital had been routed somewhere else entirely. I began running a localized algorithmic trace on the domestic wire transfers. I watched the data streams cascade down the monitor. The thief had utilized an archaic tumbling sequence to hide the final destination. They bounced the stolen funds through a dozen regional Virginia banks, breaking the total sum into smaller, random increments to avoid triggering federal flagging alerts. It was a classic, highly inefficient embezzlement technique. It was messy. It lacked the sleek, sophisticated international architecture of Page's espionage operation. I leaned back in the tall wooden stool, rubbing my tired eyes. Two distinct operational signatures. Two vastly different methodologies. The truth settled over me with the crushing weight of a falling vault. Page and the domestic thief were not working together. They were entirely separate entities feeding on the same oblivious dying host. Derek was a deeply arrogant pawn. He strutted through his country club life believing he was a titan of industry, running a lucrative federal contracting empire. In reality, he was a bleeding carcass surrounded by quiet predators. Page was running a high-level corporate espionage con, extracting military secrets to sell to foreign buyers. Meanwhile, someone else was quietly draining the operational cash reserves right under his nose. Two parasites. Neither one knew about the other. Derek's grand infidelity was nothing more than a convenient smokescreen utilized by both thieves to cover their tracks. I leaned forward, targeting the final destination of the domestic wires. I stripped away the false routing numbers one by one. The decryption program chewed through the layers of financial data. A local routing prefix began to form on the screen. It was tied to a private wealth management firm in Richmond. I was minutes away from unmasking the second parasite. The progress bar inched toward completion. A sharp metallic click echoed from the back of the house. I froze. My fingers hovered rigidly over the keyboard. The sound was distinct and unnatural. It was the heavy brass tumbler of the patio door lock sliding out of place. Someone was breaking in. My pulse accelerated, but I did not gasp. I did not scream. I closed the laptop, sliding it silently under the deep overhang of the kitchen island. I pressed my back against the cold marble cabinets, allowing the suffocating darkness of the house to swallow my presence. I slowed my breathing, inhaling the faint smell of rain still clinging to my trench coat. Footsteps moved across the hardwood floor. They were slow, deliberate, and practiced. The soft squeak of thick rubber soles confirmed my suspicion. I peered cautiously around the edge of the granite island. A sliver of moonlight cut across the hallway floor, casting a long, dark shadow into the kitchen. The silhouette of heavy tactical boots moved past the dining room entrance. It was not a federal agent. The feds announced themselves with battering rams and floodlights. This was a ghost. A professional intruder dressed in dark tactical clothing, carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. He bypassed the expensive electronics resting in the living room. He ignored the silver flatware in the dining cabinets. He was not here to steal my possessions. He was moving with specific, targeted purpose toward the basement door. My basement housed the secure, soundproofed office where Derek used to take his classified defense calls. It was structurally reinforced to meet basic federal compliance standards. I slipped my mobile phone from my pocket. I lowered the screen brightness to 0, leaving only the faintest glow to guide my eyes. I accessed the smart security grid I had custom installed 3 years ago. The intruder opened the basement door and descended the wooden stairs with silent precision. I crept down the main hallway, tracking his movements through the internal thermal cameras displayed directly on my phone screen. The glowing heat signature walked into the soundproof office. He set the canvas duffel bag on the mahogany desk and unzipped it. The high-definition camera feed showed him pulling out thick stacks of banded $100 bills and a forged financial ledger. The realization struck me like a physical blow. He was planting evidence. He was staging the scene so the FBI would find the stolen cash directly inside my personal workspace. If Agent Collins executed a secondary search warrant and found those bandit stacks, the treason charge would stick forever. My life would end behind concrete walls. The domestic parasite had hired a corrupt private investigator to ensure I took the fall for the missing millions. The intruder placed the final stack of bills inside the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. He wiped the handles with a microfiber cloth to remove his fingerprints. He turned to leave his mission complete. I did not panic. I tapped the security application interface on my phone. The heavy, reinforced steel door of the basement office swung shut with a solid, definitive thud. The electronic deadbolt engaged instantly. A magnetic seal locked the thick steel frame securely into place. The intruder lunged for the brass handle. He pulled with all his strength. He twisted the knob. The door did not budge. The room was structurally designed to prevent classified audio from leaking out. It was a literal vault, and he was now trapped inside it. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, watching him on the small, glowing screen. He pounded his fists against the reinforced glass panel set into the heavy door. His mouth moved rapidly, shouting angry, desperate words I could not hear. The premium soundproofing absorbed his panic entirely. He kicked the steel frame, leaving scuff marks on the pristine paint. He paced the small, confined room like a caged animal, realizing the fatal flaw in his tactical execution. He pulled a heavy tactical knife from his belt, attempting to pry the magnetic seal apart. The tempered steel resisted his futile efforts. I did not confront him. I did not walk down the stairs to exchange a single word of dialogue. I refused to grant him the satisfaction of an argument. I simply pressed the silent panic button embedded within my security application. A direct emergency signal routed instantly to the local police department dispatch center, bypassing the audible alarms. I walked back to the dark kitchen and retrieved my hidden laptop from beneath the counter. The police would arrive in less than 10 minutes to arrest an armed intruder trapped inside my basement. But before the flashing blue lights illuminated my driveway, I needed to finish my work. The domestic routing trace had finally finished processing while the intruder was busy planting his fake evidence. The final puzzle piece waited for me on the glowing monitor. I opened the decrypted file displaying the owner of the Richmond Wealth Management account. The name printed across the digital ledger sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The man trapped downstairs was merely a hired gun. The true mastermind, the second parasite bleeding my life dry, was someone much closer to home. And the data hidden inside that trapped investigator's phone would give me everything I needed to destroy her. The strobing blue and red lights cut through the heavy autumn darkness, painting my living room walls in frantic, jagged strokes. The local precinct arrived precisely 8 minutes after I triggered the silent panic alarm. Heavy fists pounded on the ruined front door frame, announcing their presence. I walked up the basement stairs, wrapping a thick cashmere shawl around my shoulders. I needed to project the image of a startled, vulnerable homeowner, a woman terrified by a break-in, not a federal compliance auditor orchestrating a trap. I directed the responding patrolman toward the basement. I kept my right hand buried deep inside the pocket of my trench coat. My fingers curled tightly around a localized signal skimmer. It was a compact piece of forensic hardware I occasionally utilized during hostile corporate audits. The device possessed the capability to clone unsecured mobile data within a 10-foot proximity radius. As the armed officers marched down the wooden steps, I followed closely behind them, maintaining a fearful expression. The intruder stood inside the soundproof office, glaring at me through the reinforced glass panel. He had exhausted himself trying to pry the magnetic seal apart. 2 officers drew their weapons, demanding he step back and place his hands on his head. I reached around the corner and typed the administrative override code into the wall-mounted keypad. The heavy steel door popped open with a definitive pneumatic hiss. The police rushed into the confined space, shoving the man against the mahogany desk. The metallic clink of handcuffs echoed sharply in the small room. I stepped into the doorway, bringing my body within 3 feet of his tactical belt. The green indicator light on my hidden skimmer pulsed against the fabric of my pocket. It seized the encrypted handshake from his mobile device, mirroring the cache directory in real time. The officers hauled the intruder to his feet, reading him his Miranda rights. He locked eyes with me. His gaze was full of venom and the bitter realization that he had walked blindly into a cage. He did not say a word. The progress bar in my mind ticked upward as the patrolman marched him past me and up the stairs. The green light on my device turned solid. The data transfer was finished. The police cruisers eventually pulled away, carrying the hired gun into the night. My driveway was empty once more. I descended back into the cold basement and locked the steel door behind me, sealing myself inside the vault. The air smelled of stale sweat and damp canvas left behind by the intruder. He had abandoned his duffel bag on the desk. The banded $100 bills spilled out next to the forged financial ledger he intended to plant. I ignored the physical evidence. I pulled the skimmer from my pocket and connected it directly to my burner laptop. The cloned data populated my high-resolution screen. Text messages, call logs, and encrypted email drafts flooded the interface. I ran a standard parsing script to untangle the raw code, filtering out the useless noise. The primary communication thread I needed floated to the top of the queue. The contact name was saved simply as the matriarch. I opened the text history. The logs detailed a months-long conspiracy. The hired gun provided regular surveillance updates outlining my movements, my work schedule, and the specific vulnerabilities of my home network. The responses from the other end were sharp, demanding, and distinctively articulate. I knew that syntax. I had endured that exact condescending tone at every Thanksgiving dinner and holiday party for 7 years. It was Audrey. My mother-in-law had hired the man who just tried to frame me. I scrolled to the very bottom of the thread, reading the final instructions sent just hours before he broke through my patio door. The glowing pixels formed a sentence that froze the blood in my veins. Make sure she looks guilty enough to end it all. The words hung in the quiet room, dripping with a cruelty I could scarcely comprehend. This was not a simple framing operation designed to protect stolen money. This was a calculated psychological execution. Audrey did not just want me arrested by the Department of Defense. She wanted the public shame, the impending federal treason charges, and the planted evidence to crush my spirit so thoroughly that I would take my own life. She wanted a tragic, neat conclusion to her messy financial problem. A dead daughter-in-law cannot testify at a grand jury hearing. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, illuminating the staggering depth of her betrayal. Audrey projected the flawless image of generational wealth. She lived in a sprawling colonial estate, hosted lavish charity galas, and sneered at the working-class professionals who populated Northern Virginia. But old money rots if it is not actively replenished. Her family fortune had been crumbling for decades, mismanaged by her late husband and eroded by bad investments. She was drowning in property taxes and legacy debts she could never pay without liquidating her precious estate. Derek and his defense logistics firm served as her secret lifeline. She used her own son's company as a personal piggy bank, quietly siphoning the operational cash reserves to maintain her aristocratic facade. But draining $2.4 million leaves a gaping hole in a corporate balance sheet. a hole a skilled federal auditor would eventually discover during a routine compliance check. She needed a scapegoat to take the fall before my next quarterly review. The brilliance of her manipulation became undeniably clear. Audrey had noticed Paige hovering around Derek. Instead of protecting her son's marriage, the matriarch encouraged the infidelity. She invited Paige to the country club. She subtly pushed them together, ensuring Derek became deeply entangled in a scandalous affair. The romance was the perfect smokescreen. While Derek was blinded by his illicit relationship, and Paige was busy running her own separate corporate espionage con, stealing defense schematics, Audrey backed the digital truck up to the loading dock and emptied the bank accounts. Derek was a fool, playing right into the hands of the two women he thought he controlled. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the stacks of planted cash resting on the mahogany desk. I was trapped between two independent predators operating in the same ecosystem. Paige held the classified military data threatening national security. Audrey held the stolen domestic cash, threatening my personal freedom and my sanity. Both women believed they had won. Both women thought I was a quiet, practical obstacle they had successfully removed from the board. I could not simply hand this cloned phone to Agent Collins. The feds cared about the treason. They cared about the offshore spy who breached a military supply chain. If I exposed Audrey right now, local authorities would bungle the embezzlement case, and she would use her elite connections to bury the evidence before a judge could issue a warrant. I had to weave these two separate investigations together. I had to pit the federal treason case against the domestic fraud case. I needed to force the two parasites to consume each other. But to do that, I needed to understand exactly how Audrey planned to survive the fallout of her own son fleeing the country. I turned back to the financial ledgers, digging deeper into the domestic footprint she left behind. And as I traced the origin of the funds paying the trapped investigator, I uncovered a terrifying new layer to her plan that elevated my fight from professional survival to a literal fight for my life. The heavy steel door of the vault separated me from the flashing sirens outside. I sat alone in the silence. The cloned phone data glowed on my monitor. I had unmasked Audrey as the architect of the domestic theft. But a seasoned auditor never stops at the first layer of fraud. The investigator was expensive. A hired gun willing to break into a federal employee's home and plant fake financial ledgers demands a premium upfront retainer. Audrey was drowning in generational debt. Her country estate was hemorrhaging cash. If she was bleeding Derek's logistics firm dry to save her sinking ship, where did she find the liquid capital to pay a professional fixer? I opened a new terminal window on the burner laptop. I isolated the transaction hashes sent to the trapped investigator's routing number. I traced the money backward. I followed the digital breadcrumbs through the dense labyrinth of local Virginia credit unions. The funds did not originate from the embezzled corporate accounts. That would have been too risky, tying the theft directly to the cover-up. The retainer fee came from a distinct, separate financial reservoir. The routing node resolved into a familiar address. My eyes scanned the glowing text. I blinked, leaning closer to the high-resolution screen. The origin point was not a bank vault in Richmond. It was a property parcel identification number. It was my address. The house I was currently sitting inside. Confusion is a rare emotion for a compliance officer. I accessed the county property registry utilizing a secure back-end portal I relied upon during defense contractor background checks. I entered my parcel identification number. The municipal database loaded a scanned document of the property deed. My breath caught in my throat. A fresh lien sat attached to the deed. A second mortgage filed 90 days ago. The sum borrowed against the equity I had meticulously built over a decade was staggering. It was a crippling amount of debt tied directly to the walls surrounding me. I scrolled down to the authorization signatures at the bottom of the digital page. Derek's name was scrawled in his usual careless script. Next to his signature was mine. It was a flawless forgery. The slope of the letters, the sharp angle of the capital F, the trailing loop at the end of my last name. Derek had copied the exact penmanship I used on our joint tax returns. He had secretly leveraged my home, my sanctuary, to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars in raw cash. The timeline felt wrong. 3 months ago, Derek was already entangled with Paige. Was this mortgage the escape fund? Did he extract the equity to finance his lavish flight to Cancun? I ran the numbers. The math failed. A man fleeing to Mexico with a corporate spy would stash that money in an offshore account. He would not leave portions of it sitting in a local credit union to pay a private investigator. The mortgage was not an escape hatch. It was an investment. I followed the bulk of the mortgage disbursement wire. The majority of the borrowed equity did not go to a travel agency. It bypassed the Cayman Islands entirely. The funds routed directly to a premium holding account for a highly specialized underwriting firm located in the financial district of Richmond. An insurance underwriter. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The mechanical clicks echoed sharply in the soundproof room. I hacked the broker's public-facing portal, exploiting a known vulnerability in their client verification software. I input my social security number and bypassed the dual authentication prompt. A comprehensive policy document materialized on my screen. It was a high-risk executive life insurance policy. The coverage amount was $5 million. The insured individual listed on the first page was Faith Myers. I stared at my own name. The policy was structured as an expedited corporate key person agreement. It bypassed standard medical waiting periods in exchange for a staggering upfront premium. The exact premium funded by the forged second mortgage on my home. It was designed to pay out instantly upon my death, regardless of the cause. I scrolled to the beneficiary designation. The payout was not assigned to my husband. It was assigned to a proxy trust. I decrypted the trust hierarchy using a cross-reference state registry database. The sole proprietor of the trust was Audrey. The basement vault felt suddenly devoid of oxygen. The glowing monitor cast a harsh blue light over the planted $100 bills resting on the desk beside me. The chilling text message I had extracted from the hired gun's phone echoed in my mind. Make sure she looks guilty enough to end it all. The pieces of the nightmare slammed together, forming a picture so depraved it defied logic. This was not merely a framing operation. It was a calculated psychological execution. Audrey did not just want me arrested by the Department of Defense. She wanted the public shame, the impending federal treason charges, and the planted evidence to crush my spirit so thoroughly that I would take my own life. She needed a neat, tragic conclusion to her messy financial problem. A disgraced federal auditor facing decades in a penitentiary, choosing suicide rather than prison, creates the perfect narrative. The investigation closes, the guilty party is dead, and the $5 million payout triggers automatically delivering the exact sum of money required to save her rotting colonial estate from foreclosure. A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Thanksgiving dinner at Audrey's sprawling country home last November. The dining room smelled of roasted sage and bitter wine. Audrey sat at the head of the long, polished table wrapped in expensive cashmere. I was exhausted from a 70-hour work week preparing for a Pentagon compliance audit. I had politely declined a second glass of Chardonnay, citing a headache. Audrey had smiled, her eyes devoid of warmth, over the rim of her crystal glass. You work too hard, Faith. What would Derek ever do if your heart just gave out from all that stress? It was not a passive-aggressive jab. It was an evaluation. She was already measuring me for a coffin. She saw my demanding career not as an asset to her son, but as the perfect, plausible excuse for a sudden, tragic demise. The realization that my mother-in-law was actively engineering my death stripped away the final remnants of my shock. The betrayal eclipsed any lingering sense of marital grief. The fear of federal prison evaporated. A profound, icy calm settled into my bones. The stakes had elevated far beyond clearing my professional reputation or saving my bank accounts. This was a literal fight for my survival. I looked at the forged ledger and the banded cash the investigator had left behind. They thought I was a quiet, practical bureaucrat who would fold under the immense pressure of a government raid. They assumed the destruction of my reputation would break my mind. They were wrong. I was an auditor. I spent my life dismantling complex systems built by arrogant thieves. I knew how to find the structural weaknesses in any fortress, and Audrey had just handed me the blueprints to hers. My resolve hardened into a pure, distilled fury. I was not just going to clear my name. I was going to systematically dismantle her entire legacy. I would tear down the pristine facade of her generational wealth and expose the rotting core underneath. I would ensure she felt the exact same suffocating dread she had planned for me. I closed the insurance document and saved the encrypted files to my secure drive. I had the motive. I had the financial paper trail proving her domestic embezzlement. Now I needed a weapon to strike at Paige the offshore spy who still held the stolen military schematics. The two separate investigations had to collide. I had to force the corporate espionage case to intersect with the domestic fraud case. I reached for my coffee mug, but my hand stopped mid-air. The burner phone resting next to my keyboard vibrated. A bright white incoming call notification shattered the silence of the vault. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a lengthy numerical string. It was an international country code. The call was originating from Mexico. Derek was calling me. The arrogant pawn who had initiated this entire nightmare was reaching out from the very paradise he thought he had conquered. The timing was flawless. He was about to provide the exact leverage I needed to ignite the war. I picked up the device, took a slow, measured breath, and pressed answer. Midnight struck the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking the beginning of a new day. I carried my burner phone upstairs, leaving the basement vault secured behind me. The house was quiet. The shadows in the kitchen stretched long and dark across the hardwood floor. I walked to the stove and turned on the gas burner. The blue flame hissed to life, casting a flickering glow across the marble island. I filled the kettle with filtered water and set it over the heat. The storm outside had passed, leaving a heavy stillness over the neighborhood. My pulse was steady. The discovery of the life insurance policy had burned away my panic, leaving behind a cold, hardened clarity. Audrey wanted me dead. Derek had unknowingly handed her the weapon. The burner phone vibrated against the stone countertop. The bright screen illuminated, displaying an 11-digit sequence, starting with the international dialing code for Mexico. I did not answer immediately. I connected the audio output to my encrypted laptop, routing the incoming signal through a digital recording program. The kettle began to whistle, a low, piercing sound that cut through the silence. I poured the boiling water into a ceramic mug, watching the dark chamomile leaves steep and unfurl. I swiped the green icon on the screen, accepting the connection. "Faith, please tell me you were there." Derek spoke with a frantic, breathless panic. His voice lacked the arrogant, smooth cadence he used at the country club. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of a man who had finally hit the bottom of a very deep well. Behind his desperate words, I heard the distinct acoustic echo of a concrete room. Shouting voices echoed in Spanish down a long corridor. A heavy metal gate slammed shut, rattling against stone. He was calling from a holding cell. I picked up a silver spoon and began stirring my tea. The metal clinked softly against the ceramic rim. I did not say a word. I let his panic fill the empty kitchen. Faith, you have to help me. The resort manager called the local authorities. They confiscated my passport. They claim I defrauded the hotel for tens of thousands of dollars. I am locked inside a municipal jail, and the guards will not let me contact the embassy. I took a slow sip of the hot liquid. The tea tasted bitter on my tongue. His entire life was a sequence of women bailing him out of trouble. Audrey had smoothed over his academic failures. I had restructured his failing business. Now stranded in a foreign cage, his first instinct was to call the woman he had just framed for treason and demand a rescue. It was the peak of narcissistic delusion. Paige is gone, Faith. She took everything. The safe is empty. My accounts are frozen. I have nothing left. He was begging. The titan of defense logistics was weeping into a smuggled cellular phone. I placed the mug on the counter. What do you want, Derek? My voice was flat, devoid of any sympathy. I need $50,000. Right now. You have to wire it to a local magistrate. It is an expedited administrative fine, but it is essentially a bribe. If I pay it, they will release me and put me on a flight back to Virginia. If I do not pay it, they are going to transfer me to a federal penitentiary in the morning. You know I cannot survive in a place like that. I leaned against the marble island. The recording software captured every digital packet of his voice. The audio waveform danced across the screen, mapping his downfall in real time. He was handing me the keys to his own destruction. Why would I send $50,000 to a man who just accused me of stealing millions? Derek let out a choked, desperate laugh. The sound was pathetic. I can fix that. I promise I will fix that. If you send the money, I will tell the FBI the truth. I will tell them you had nothing to do with the missing funds. I will clear your name, Faith. You just have to wire the cash. I needed him to articulate the exact details of the conspiracy. I needed his recorded confession to be undeniable in a federal court. The FBI already has the router logs, Derek. They know the data breach originated from my home network. How exactly do you plan to explain that away? He did not hesitate. His self-preservation instinct overrode whatever loyalty he had left for his mother or his lover. I installed the back door. He spoke the words in a frantic rush, eager to trade his secrets for his freedom. I hired a private technician off the books to bypass your firewall while you were in Denver. But it was not my idea, Faith. My mother gave me the software. The revelation hung in the air, verifying my exact theory. I kept my breathing even. Audrey gave you the digital key. Yes. She told me you were planning to ruin me in the divorce. She said you were going to freeze the company accounts and take everything I built. She handed me a flash drive and told me to plug it into the primary server rack. She said it would create a hidden offshore channel to protect my operational capital from your lawyers. I thought I was just hiding money from you. His ignorance was staggering. Audrey had played her own son like a cheap instrument. She convinced him to install the exact exploit Paige needed to extract the classified military schematics, and she used that same blind obedience to drain the corporate treasury to save her failing estate. What about Paige? I asked, my tone calm and probing. Paige said she needed the client shipping routes to start a rival logistics firm. Derek sniffled the sound echoing through the poor connection. I gave her the access codes. She told me we were going to build a new empire in Cancun. I had no idea she was selling government secrets, Faith. I swear to you, I did not know about the defense schematics. He was telling the truth. The sheer stupidity of his confession proved it. He believed the entire operation was a simple domestic dispute. He thought he was hiding marital assets and stealing corporate client lists. He was utterly oblivious to the international espionage. and he was entirely blind to the $5 million life insurance policy Audrey had purchased on my life using his forged signature. He was a useful idiot who had outlived his usefulness. Faith, please. The guards are coming back soon. I need the transfer confirmation number. Wire the funds and I will testify to all of this in court. I will give you my mother. I will give you Paige. Just get me out of this cell. I picked up my tea mug, taking another slow, deliberate sip. The warmth radiated through my chest. I looked at the audio software. The file was securely saved and encrypted. Derek, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You forged my signature on a second mortgage. You allowed a corporate spy into my home. You handed your mother the weapon she intended to use to end my life. Faith, what are you talking about? Life insurance? I never signed anything like that. You did not read the documents she placed in front of you. You never read the documents, Derek. That was always your fatal flaw. Silence stretched across the line, broken only by his shallow, panicked breathing. The reality of his situation was finally penetrating his thick, arrogant skull. He was beginning to understand that the women in his life had not adored him. They had weaponized him. Faith, please do not do this. You made your bed in the sand, Derek. I suggest you get comfortable. I pressed the red icon terminating the call. The connection severed instantly, leaving my kitchen in perfect silence. I did not feel a trace of guilt. I felt the pure, unadulterated satisfaction of watching a parasite detach from its host. I turned my attention back to the burner laptop. The recording was pristine. Derek had laid out the architecture of the conspiracy implicating Audrey as the source of the router exploit and identifying Paige as the recipient of the access codes. It was the exact piece of leverage Agent Collins demanded during our meeting at the diner. But I possessed another vital piece of intelligence. During the 7-minute phone call, my network tracing software had mapped the incoming cellular signal. I isolated the exact latitude and longitude coordinates of his connection. I pinpointed the specific municipal jail holding him in the Yucatan region. I attached the encrypted audio file and the geographic coordinates to a secure email. I addressed the message to the direct private inbox Agent Collins maintained for classified correspondence. I typed a single sentence in the body of the email. The husband is ready to cooperate. I hit send. The data vanished into the digital ether, speeding toward the Department of Defense. Derek was no longer my problem. He was securely locked inside a foreign prison holding cell. The federal government would extradite him shortly, dragging him back to Virginia to face a grand jury. He would spend the rest of his miserable life trapped in a courtroom, realizing his mother and his lover had destroyed his existence. His part in this game was over. I closed the laptop, feeling a profound sense of liberation. The dead weight of my marriage was officially severed. I was free to hunt the real predators. Audrey believed her hired investigator was planting the fake evidence downstairs. She thought her trap was springing shut. Paige believed she was safe, preparing to sell the stolen military secrets to the highest bidder. They were both wrong. The federal treason case was about to blow wide open. Agent Collins now had the proof he needed to authorize a domestic strike on the corporate spy. Paige was arrogant. She thought her offshore proxies shielded her from domestic consequences. But I knew her psychological profile better than any federal profiler ever could. I knew exactly how to track her down, utilizing the very vanity that made her such a dangerous enemy. The dawn broke over Alexandria, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. My encrypted laptop chimed with an incoming priority message. It was Agent Collins. The audio file of Derek weeping in his Mexican holding cell had triggered a massive shift at the Department of Defense. The recorded confession dismantled the narrative Derek had constructed. The federal prosecutors immediately stayed the impending indictment against my name. I was no longer the prime suspect in a treason investigation. I was an invaluable asset. Less than an hour later, a sleek black armored utility vehicle pulled into my driveway. Collins stood on my front porch. His demeanor had transformed overnight. He was no longer the skeptical interrogator trying to corner a desperate wife. He looked at me with the cautious respect reserved for a fellow tactician. He stated that the extradition paperwork for my husband was already moving through diplomatic channels, but the military schematics remained exposed. Paige held the classified supply chain documents, and if she uploaded them to her foreign buyers, the damage to national security would be irreversible. Collins needed to locate her immediately. I told him to get into the vehicle. I knew exactly where she was hiding. Paige operated on a distinct frequency of vanity. During our 14-year friendship, I observed her psychological patterns closely. She despised discomfort. She considered herself a refined, aristocratic operator, far superior to the gritty reality of criminal life. A traditional fugitive would vanish into the Appalachian Mountains or cross the border into a chaotic foreign city. Not Paige. She required high thread count sheets room service and a panoramic view to feel secure. She maintained a secret corporate lease under one of her shell companies in the financial district of downtown Richmond. It was a luxury penthouse suite occupying the entire top floor of a glass skyscraper. She bragged about the property during a drunken wine tasting 2 years ago, claiming it was her private sanctuary away from the mundane suburbs. We rode south on the interstate inside the mobile command center. The interior of the surveillance van hummed with the sound of cooling fans and encrypted radio chatter. Tactical operatives dressed in dark assault gear checked their weapons and reviewed the structural blueprints of the high-rise building. The air smelled of gun oil and nervous adrenaline. I sat in the corner, gripping a mug of bitter coffee, watching the digital tracking monitors. The Richmond skyline soon pierced the horizon, its towering glass structures reflecting the morning sun. The vehicle idled in a subterranean loading dock beneath the skyscraper. Collins orchestrated the raid from a bank of glowing screens alongside 2 federal cyber technicians. The assault team ascended the service elevator, moving in total silence. They stacked outside the reinforced mahogany doors of the penthouse. Collins gave the order to breach. At that exact moment, the command van plunged into chaos. Red warning banners flooded the federal monitors. The lead cyber technician cursed, slamming his fists against the metal console. Paige had installed a proximity perimeter alarm tied to the hallway surveillance cameras. She knew the raid was happening before the tactical team even planted the explosive charges on her door. She did not try to run. She initiated a scorched earth protocol, a massive data purge algorithm engaged on her internal network. A secondary progress bar appeared on our screens, tracking a high-speed encrypted upload directed toward a dark web proxy server. Paige was attempting a dead man switch. She was simultaneously wiping the local hard drives to destroy the forensic evidence while blasting the classified military schematics out to her foreign buyers. Once that progress bar reached 100%, the supply chain secrets would belong to international hostile entities. The federal hackers furiously typed rapid strings of countermeasure code, attempting to sever the building network connection. Their efforts bounced harmlessly off her military-grade firewall. The technicians shouted that the encryption was too dense. They needed a physical override or a root password to abort the command sequence. The upload bar crossed 40%. They had less than 60 seconds before the data vanished into the digital ether. I stood up from my seat in the corner. I pushed past the sweating federal technician and took control of the primary keyboard. Collins grabbed my shoulder, demanding to know what I was doing. I ignored his interference. My eyes locked onto the password prompt guarding the root access terminal. The government agents were trying to break the door down using brute force algorithms. They treated the firewall like a machine. But an auditor knows that every machine is built by a human being, and human beings are inherently flawed by their own emotional arrogance. I met Paige during our freshman year of college. We shared a cramped dormitory room. While I studied late into the night preparing for my accounting exams, she spent hours applying makeup and cultivating a flawless social persona. She possessed an overwhelming need to be perceived as royalty. She won a minor regional beauty pageant that spring and insisted on wearing the cheap plastic crown around our apartment for months. She adopted a ridiculous Latin phrase as her personal mantra, claiming it defined her superior destiny. She had it engraved on her jewelry and embossed on her expensive stationery. Paige was a brilliant corporate spy, but her narcissism was an inescapable prison. A truly secure password must be a random generation of meaningless characters. But a narcissist can never resist the opportunity to admire their own reflection, even in the darkest corners of their digital life. The upload bar crossed 70%. The tactical team radioed that they had blown the hinges off the penthouse door and were clearing the sprawling living room. My fingers flew across the illuminated keys. I bypassed the complex numeric string generators. I typed the exact Latin phrase Paige used to stroke her own ego decades ago. Regina sine corona, queen without a crown. I capitalized the first letters and added her birth year at the end. I struck the enter key. The red warning banners vanished instantly. The root access terminal flashed a brilliant, welcoming green. The password was accepted. Her vanity had neutralized her military-grade encryption. I executed an immediate hard abort on the outgoing dark web transmission. The upload progress bar froze at 92% before dissolving entirely into the trash directory. I followed the cancellation protocol by isolating her entire local area network. I severed the penthouse from the global internet and initiated a total lockdown on her physical hard drives. The military schematics were safe. The dead man switch was disarmed. Before I relinquished control of the terminal, I executed one final command. I took remote control of her panoramic desktop monitors, currently sitting on her glass desk 50 floors above us. I changed her pristine wallpaper to a solid black background. I typed a single message in stark white font, spanning the width of her screens. Good luck. The tactical radio crackled to life, filling the command van with the sharp sound of securing a hostile target. The squad leader confirmed that the suspect was in custody. Through the open audio channel, I heard Paige screaming. Her voice was not the smooth, aristocratic purr she utilized at country club dinners. It was the shrill, panicked shriek of a cornered predator realizing her flawless operation had just collapsed around her. She screamed at the federal agents, demanding to know how they bypassed her firewall. She stared at the black monitors, recognizing the exact phrase I had sent to Derek 12 hours earlier. The profound realization that her quiet, boring friend had just outmaneuvered her echoed through her frantic cries. Collins exhaled a long, heavy breath. He looked at the neutralized code on the screen and then turned to me. He offered a slight appreciative nod. The national security threat was formally contained. The first parasite was captured. 15 minutes later, the heavy steel doors of the loading dock elevator parted. 2 armed agents escorted Paige out of the building. Her wrists were bound tightly in heavy steel handcuffs. Her designer silk blouse was wrinkled and her hair hung in a chaotic tangle across her face. She looked small, pathetic, and entirely ordinary. She was no longer a sophisticated international spy. She was just a common criminal marching toward a very long prison sentence. I watched her through the tinted ballistic glass of the surveillance van. I felt no lingering sadness for the friendship she had discarded. I felt only the cold, clinical satisfaction of closing a toxic ledger. The corporate espionage ring was shattered. Collins ordered the driver to return to the local field office to process the evidence. He thanked me for my service, promising that my federal agency suspension would be revoked by tomorrow morning. My career was salvaged. My freedom was secured. But as the armored vehicle navigated through the busy Richmond traffic, my mind remained sharp and restless. The treason charge was gone, but the $5 million life insurance policy still existed. The forged second mortgage still corrupted my property deed. The corporate spy was sitting in handcuffs, but the domestic thief was currently selecting floral arrangements for a lavish charity event. Audrey was still breathing the free air of her country estate, oblivious to the fact that her son was in a Mexican prison and her espionage partner was locked in a federal interrogation room. She believed her psychological execution plan was running perfectly. She expected me to crumble under the weight of her manipulation. I pulled my trench coat tighter around my shoulders, staring out at the passing city skyline. The federal government had finished their war. Mine was just entering its final, devastating phase. I turned my crosshairs onto the matriarch, preparing to weaponize the ultimate bureaucratic trap to dismantle her aristocratic empire. The heavy glass doors of the federal field office closed behind me, sealing the chaotic morning into the past. I stood on the Richmond sidewalk, inhaling the crisp autumn air. The plastic lanyard holding my government security clearance badge rested firmly in my palm. A formal letter of reinstatement sat folded inside my coat pocket. Agent Collins had kept his word. The treason investigation surrounding my name was officially terminated. The Department of Defense had their corporate spy securely locked inside an interrogation room, and my husband was currently awaiting extradition from a foreign holding cell. My phone chimed with a sequential series of notifications. I unlocked the screen, tapping the secure banking application. The digital padlocks vanished. The long rows of zeros populated my dashboard, reflecting the sudden release of my frozen assets. The 7-figure sum I had meticulously accumulated over a decade of auditing defense contractors was back under my sole control. The oxygen returned to my lungs. I possessed my identity, my career, and my wealth. Most people would consider this the end of the nightmare. They would hire a divorce attorney, change their last name, and seek a quiet, peaceful life. I am not most people. I walked to my vehicle and started the engine. The engine purred a low, steady rhythm. I navigated the highway heading back to Alexandria. The federal government had finished their portion of the war. They caught the spy who threatened national security. But the Department of Defense cared nothing for the domestic embezzlement that nearly drove me to suicide. They did not care about the forged signature on my property deed or the $5 million life insurance policy designed to trigger upon my death. Those were civil matters. To a federal prosecutor, Audrey was merely a greedy mother-in-law operating a separate financial fraud. If I handed her over to local law enforcement, she would hire a team of expensive defense attorneys. She would drag the litigation out for years, hiding behind her aristocratic lineage and her political connections. She would paint herself as a grieving mother manipulated by her criminal son. I refused to let a courtroom dictate my justice. I wanted Audrey to experience the exact suffocating public destruction she had engineered for me. I arrived at my fortified home and bypassed the kitchen, walking straight into my home office. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting sharp, horizontal shadows across my mahogany desk. I ignored the glowing computer monitors. Digital records are easily manipulated. I reached for the bottom shelf of my bookcase and pulled out a physical volume. It was a dense, heavy, hardbound copy of the Internal Revenue Service Tax Code Handbook. To the average citizen, this manual is a cure for insomnia. To a forensic auditor, it is a blueprint for financial anatomy. I dropped the heavy book onto the desk. The sound echoed through the quiet room. I sat down, turning the thin, crisp pages. The smell of dry ink and aged paper grounded my racing thoughts. I traced the columns of microscopic text, searching for a very specific intersection of property law and criminal restitution. Audrey believed she had insulated herself perfectly. She utilized a proxy trust to purchase the life insurance policy and launder the embezzled corporate funds. Trusts are notoriously difficult to pierce. They are legal fortresses designed to protect generational wealth from creditors and lawsuits. But fortresses have structural flaws if you know where the foundational concrete was poured. My index finger stopped halfway down page 842. I found the clause. It was a hyper-specific, obscure legal loophole regarding fraudulent marital transfers. The statute dictated that any proxy trust funded even partially by stolen marital assets is fundamentally contaminated. The corporate veil is instantly pierced. Audrey had instructed Derek to forge my signature on a second mortgage tied to my Alexandria home. She took the equity from my marital property and injected it directly into her private holding accounts to purchase the insurance premium. By using my stolen equity to insulate her wealth, she unknowingly gave me the legal right to stake a claim on her entire financial portfolio. I closed the FIC manual. The satisfying thud resonated in my chest. I did not need a local detective. I needed a shark. I placed a call to Silas Thorne. Silas was a ruthless commercial property attorney operating out of the Northern Virginia Tech Corridor. He was a man who treated real estate law like a blood sport. He possessed a reputation for dismantling hostile corporate acquisitions and stripping failing businesses down to their copper wiring. We met 2 hours later inside his sterile, glass-walled conference room. The space smelled of expensive leather and bitter espresso. I laid out the printed ledgers, the forged mortgage documents, and the property records identifying Audrey's vast colonial estate. I explained the tax code loophole demonstrating the contaminated flow of funds. Silas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. He studied the documents, his dark eyes scanning the routing numbers. A predatory grin slowly formed on his face. He understood the architecture of my trap before I even finished outlining the parameters. "You do not want to sue her," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly murmur. "A lawsuit gives her the opportunity to defend herself. You want to execute a hostile takeover of her personal life." I nodded, sliding a certified bank draft across the table to cover his exorbitant retainer. "I want to be her landlord." We brought in a specialized forensic accountant named Elias to structure the acquisition. Elias worked in silence, his fingers dancing across a silver laptop. He dug into the public records surrounding Audrey's sprawling country estate. The aristocratic facade was crumbling far faster than I had anticipated. The property was heavily leveraged. Audrey had taken out 3 separate high-interest loans against the land over the past decade to fund her lavish lifestyle. She was currently 4 months behind on the primary balloon payment. Her creditors were preparing to initiate secret pre-foreclosure proceedings, holding off only because her family name carried historical weight in the local municipality. The banks were exhausted by her constant excuses. They were holding toxic debt. I instructed Silas to form an anonymous holding entity. We registered the shell company under the name Blue Ridge Acquisitions, shielding my identity behind 3 layers of corporate privacy clauses. Once the paperwork cleared the state registry, I wired a substantial portion of my newly restored legitimate wealth into the corporate operating account. Silas went to work. He contacted the distressed creditors holding the promissory notes against Audrey's estate. He offered them a clean, immediate exit. He purchased her defaulted mortgages for pennies on the dollar using hard, liquid cash. The regional banks were thrilled to offload the toxic assets without suffering the public relations nightmare of evicting a prominent Virginia socialite. They signed the paper transfers releasing their claims. The transaction settled quietly in the digital ether long after the banking hours concluded. I sat in Silas's office watching the final confirmation receipts print from the laser machine. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, stacking them neatly into a leather binder. The transformation was complete. Audrey thought she was battling a local credit union. She had no idea the debt had been sold. She had no idea the proxy firm that just swallowed her entire generational legacy was controlled by the daughter-in-law she had tried to drive to the grave. I was officially her primary lien holder. Because she was already in default on the original terms, the contract allowed the new debt owner to execute an immediate acceleration clause. I possessed the unilateral legal right to seize the property without a grace period. I owned the sprawling manicured lawns. I owned the towering white pillars framing the front porch. I owned the grand ballroom where she hosted her elite gatherings. I thanked Silas and walked out into the cool evening air. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. The trap was set with flawless precision. Audrey was oblivious to the financial earthquake that had just realigned her reality. According to the country club's social calendar, she was scheduled to host her annual philanthropic gala this upcoming Saturday. It was her crowning event of the season. She planned to fill her stolen ballroom with hundreds of wealthy donors, local politicians, and influential judges. She intended to wear her finest jewelry, drink expensive champagne, and accept the adoration of the Virginia elite while secretly waiting for the news of my tragic demise. She needed an audience to validate her existence. I was going to use that exact audience to witness her ruin. I climbed into my car, resting my hands on the leather steering wheel. The upcoming gala required a specific type of preparation. I could not arrive wearing the practical, conservative attire of a federal auditor. A quiet bureaucrat does not evict a queen from her throne. I needed to look like the executioner she never saw coming. As I drove toward an exclusive boutique in the city center, my burner phone vibrated in the cup holder, signaling a new incoming message from the offshore proxy server. Paige was in custody, but her automated network had just generated a delayed failsafe alert. The digital war was supposed to be over, but a final hidden script had just activated, threatening to expose my shell company before the gala even began. I pulled the vehicle onto the shoulder of the road, the tires crunching against the loose gravel. The engine idled while rain began to spit against the windshield, blurring the streetlights. My burner phone screen flashed a persistent red warning. Paige had coded a dead hand switch designed to monitor inquiries into any accounts she was tracking. The automated script was attempting to unmask Blue Ridge acquisitions. I cracked my laptop open on the passenger seat. My fingers moved with rapid urgency across the keyboard. I routed a phantom ping through a federal taxation server, disguising my shell company as a routine government revenue crawl. The red warning dissolved into a benign green glow. The failsafe deactivated. My anonymity remained intact. With the digital perimeter secure, I allowed my mind to drift toward the sprawling country estate waiting 20 miles away. I had observed Audrey prepare for her annual charity gala for 7 consecutive years. I knew the exact choreography of her vanity. I could visualize her standing before the gilded mirror in her master suite. The scent of heavy floral perfume and expensive hairspray would saturate the air. She would be clasping a strand of heirloom pearls around her neck, ensuring the flawless placement of every pale sphere against her collarbone. Audrey would study her reflection, practicing the precise angle of a fabricated sorrow. She was rehearsing her tragic victim monologue for the local elite. She would lower her gaze, adopting a fragile, heartbroken posture. She would tell the wealthy donors how her trusting boy was manipulated by a calculated bureaucrat. She would whisper about my assumed downfall, anticipating the moment the authorities found my lifeless body. She believed she was the grand architect of a flawless victory. Her illusion was total. The reality was sitting inside Silas Thorne's downtown conference room. I drove back to his office the following morning to finalize the execution. The air conditioning hummed a low, sterile note. Stacks of thick, heavy bond paper rested on the mahogany table. These were not digital approximations. These were definitive, physical contracts. Silas handed me a silver fountain pen. The metal felt cool and substantial in my grip. I reviewed the final clause of the debt purchase agreement. The regional banks had officially relinquished all claims to the colonial estate, transferring the promissory notes directly to my anonymous shell entity. Because the previous owner was chronically delinquent, the contract allowed for an immediate transfer of the deed in lieu of a drawn-out foreclosure. I pressed the nib of the pen against the signature line. The dark ink flowed smoothly, binding the transaction into permanent law. The transition of power was bloodless, silent, and final. I did not need to raise my voice or shatter a window to conquer her empire. I did it with a single stroke of ink. I did not merely own the toxic debt. I owned the towering white columns framing the entrance. I owned the vast manicured lawns where the valet parked the luxury cars. I owned the crystal chandeliers hanging in the grand ballroom where Audrey was currently arranging her floral centerpieces. The estate belonged to me. She was standing on my floorboards, breathing the air inside my house. Silas placed the certified deed and the legal injunction inside a sleek leather binder. He offered a brief, respectful nod, acknowledging the lethal precision of the maneuver. I left his office carrying the ultimate digital and physical key to her destruction. A quiet, practical federal auditor cannot walk into an aristocratic gala and command the room. The conservative slacks and beige blouses I wore to the Pentagon projected compliance. Tonight, I required armor that projected authority. I drove to an exclusive boutique tucked away in the high-end retail district. The shop attendant greeted me, offering a glass of sparkling water. I declined. I browsed the curated racks, searching for a garment that matched the cold clarity of my purpose. I selected an evening gown cut from midnight onyx silk, the fabric draped with a fluid, dangerous elegance. It featured a sharp, asymmetrical neckline and a plunging back devoid of lace or unnecessary embellishments. It was razor sharp. It was a garment designed for a woman who did not ask for permission to occupy space. I paired the gown with classic stiletto heels that produced a sharp, authoritative strike against the floor. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, rigid knot, stripping away any softness from my profile. I looked at my reflection in the boutique mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the exhausted wife who used to balance Derek's sloppy ledgers on Sunday mornings. She was a weapon, forged in the fires of their betrayal. The sun dipped below the Virginia hills, casting long violet shadows across the winding country roads. I steered my vehicle toward the estate. The leather binder rested on the passenger seat, holding the legal ruin of the matriarch. The drive felt incredibly slow, deliberately stretching the anticipation. The trees lining the two-lane highway formed a dense canopy, blocking out the fading light. Every mile marker passing by my window represented a year of silent endurance. 7 years of swallowing subtle insults. 7 years of funding their lavish existence while they mocked my practical nature. 7 years of playing the obedient background character in their self-centered theater. That theater was about to burn to the foundation. The glow of the estate appeared in the distance. String lights illuminated the towering oak trees lining the long, winding driveway. High-end catering trucks were parked near the service entrance. Luxury sedans and imported sports cars crawled toward the main gate, their headlights cutting through the descending dusk. The Virginia elite were arriving to pay tribute to their queen. I merged into the line of arriving vehicles, gripping the leather steering wheel. The tension coiled tight in my chest. As I approached the wrought iron perimeter gates, The line of cars ground to an unexpected halt. I rolled my window down, letting the crisp night air fill the cabin. Ahead of me, a team of private security guards dressed in dark, tailored suits manned the entrance. They were not the usual elderly attendants employed by the local event staff. These men carried the rigid, disciplined posture of former military contractors. They were checking every arriving vehicle against a digital manifest using glowing tablet screens. One of the guards turned away a luxury coupe, pointing a firm finger toward the exit lane. I watched the interaction closely. Audrey had never utilized specialized private security for her charity galas before. She preferred an open, welcoming atmosphere to display her generosity. The presence of tactical guards meant she was anticipating a disruption. She knew the federal investigation was circling. She knew Derek was unreachable. Her paranoia had finally breached the surface. The vehicle in front of me cleared the checkpoint. I pulled forward, stopping beside the guard station. A broad-shouldered man approached my window. A discreet earpiece rested inside his right ear. He held a tablet displaying a strict biometric guest list. But what caught my attention was the secondary screen clipped to his clipboard. It was a high-resolution photograph of my face. Audrey had not just hired security to check invitations. She had distributed my image to a private tactical team with explicit instructions. The guard leaned toward my window, his eyes flicking from the photograph to my face. The onyx dress and the sleek hair offered a momentary disguise, but he was a trained observer. His hand drifted slowly toward the heavy radio on his belt. The barrier gate remained firmly down, blocking my path to the ballroom. Audrey had built a physical wall to keep her executioner out, and I had less than 10 seconds to breach it before the guards dragged me out of my car for criminal trespassing. The guard at the perimeter gate stared at the high-resolution photograph on his clipboard. His thick fingers wrapped around the heavy black radio transmitter strapped to his tactical belt. He opened his mouth, preparing to issue a frantic alert to the interior detail. I did not give him the opportunity to speak. I reached into the passenger seat and retrieved a crisp manila folder. I extended my arm through the open window, holding the heavy bond paper directly toward his chest. Before you call for backup, you should review the updated county property registry, I said. My voice was steady, carrying the cool, authoritative tone of a woman who held all the cards. You are standing on a private estate. The deed transferred 3 hours ago. The woman who hired your firm no longer owns this land. I do. Which means your security contract now belongs to me. The guard took the folder. He unclipped a small tactical flashlight from his vest and shined the bright beam onto the documents. The harsh white light illuminated the official state seal and the bold black ink of the judicial injunction. He was a professional contractor who understood the lethal reality of binding legal documents. He recognized the signature of a superior court judge. He handed the folder back to me, stepping away from the vehicle. He tapped his earpiece, issuing a silent command to the booth operator. The heavy wrought iron gate swung open, yielding the path. I drove up the winding driveway. Ancient oak trees lined the pavement, their branches draped in warm, glowing string lights. The estate projected a fairy tale illusion of endless wealth. I parked my dark sedan directly behind a row of imported luxury vehicles, ignoring the designated drop-off zone. I stepped out into the crisp autumn night. The midnight onyx silk of my gown caught the ambient light flowing around me like liquid shadow. I grasped the thick leather-bound audit report in my left hand and walked toward the grand entrance. The grand foyer featured imported white marble tiles. A team of young men in fitted red vests rushed forward, offering to take my keys and my coat. I bypassed the bewildered valet staff entirely. I offered them a cold, unyielding stare, and they scattered like startled birds parting to let me pass. My stiletto heel struck the polished stone floor. Click, click, click. The sound was sharp and rhythmic. It was a methodical cadence cutting through the soft ambient chatter of the arriving guests. It was the sound of a reckoning marching closer with every step. I approached the arched double doors leading into the main event space. The ballroom was a breathtaking display of decaying aristocracy. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over dozens of circular tables. Centerpieces composed of towering white orchids and imported lilies filled the air with a heavy, sweet fragrance. Waiters in crisp, formal attire navigated the room, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. At the focal point of the room, Audrey sat at a grand elevated table holding court. She wore a stunning emerald gown that highlighted her signature heirloom pearls. Her eyes were dry, but she repeatedly dabbed at them with an embroidered linen napkin. She leaned in to whisper to the wife of a prominent state senator playing the role of the tragic martyr to perfection. She was spinning a venomous fairy tale for the Virginia elite. She was telling them a story of a broken family, a stolen fortune, and a devious daughter-in-law who ruined her precious son. I stepped through the arched doors and entered the light. I did not try to blend into the shadows along the perimeter. I walked directly down the center aisle. A woman seated near the entrance noticed me first. Her champagne flute halted halfway to her lips. She nudged her husband, her eyes wide with shock. The recognition spread through the room like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. The hushed murmurs began at the back of the hall and rippled forward, expanding outward in a widening circle of disbelief. Silverware stopped clinking against porcelain plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Audrey looked up, irritated by the shifting attention of her audience. Her gaze tracked the stares of her guests and landed directly on me. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. The fabricated sorrow vanished instantly, replaced by a primal, undisguised fury. She stood up her heavy wooden chair, scraping harshly against the floorboards. She raised her hand, snapping her manicured fingers with arrogant disdain. She pointed directly at my chest, signaling her interior security chief to remove the intruder, ruining her perfect evening. A tall, broad man in a dark tailored suit stepped into my path, blocking the center aisle. He raised his hands in a pacifying gesture, preparing to physically escort me out of the building. I did not break my stride. I did not flinch or shrink away from his imposing frame. I stopped mere inches from his chest. I opened my leather binder and extracted the certified duplicate of the property deed along with the emergency judicial injunction. I pressed the rigid documents firmly against his sternum. "Read the state seal," I commanded. My tone was low and unwavering, designed to travel no further than his ears. This estate transferred into my corporate holding company this afternoon. I am the sole legal owner of this property. The woman pointing at me is a delinquent tenant currently trespassing on my land. If you touch me, I will have you arrested for assault, and I will personally bankrupt your security firm by morning. The security chief glanced down at the paperwork. He saw the undeniable red stamp of the magistrate. He looked past my shoulder at Audrey, who was frantically waving her arms, demanding he act. Then he looked back into my cold, steady eyes. He performed a rapid internal calculation and understood the sudden catastrophic shift in power. He folded his hands in front of his waist, took 2 deliberate steps backward, and lowered his head. He yielded the right of way. He rendered the matriarch entirely defenseless in front of her most important peers. I continued my walk toward the center table. The room held its collective breath. 300 of Virginia's wealthiest citizens sat paralyzed, watching a ghost glide through their sanctuary. I reached her seat. Audrey trembled, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the dining table. The tendons in her neck stood out in sharp relief. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl vulgar insults or throw a glass of wine in her face. True power requires no chaotic theatrics. It requires only the heavy, undeniable weight of the truth. I lifted the thick leather-bound audit report. It contained the financial ledgers, the routing numbers linking her to the domestic embezzlement, the communication logs with the corrupt investigator, and the horrifying proxy trust documents funding the life insurance policy. I dropped the heavy binder directly onto her pristine bone china dinner plate. The fine ceramic shattered under the immense weight. Sharp porcelain shards and remnants of her catered meal scattered across the flawless white silk tablecloth. The sudden cracking sound echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous space. The string quartet playing softly in the corner faltered, hitting a discordant screeching note before stopping entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. The ambient noise of the gala evaporated, leaving only the sound of Audrey taking short, panicked breaths. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. The scent of her expensive floral perfume mingled with the sharp, metallic smell of her rising terror. I brought my face inches from hers. I locked my eyes onto her terrified gaze, ensuring she heard every single syllable of her impending doom. "Your son is sitting in a filthy Mexican prison cell crying for his mother," I whispered. The words sliced through the quiet room, carrying the finality of a judge reading a verdict. "Your corporate spy is locked inside a federal interrogation room singing to the government. And I own the ground you are standing on." Audrey opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her lips trembled as her aristocratic mask cracked and splintered. "So you have a choice to make, Audrey," I continued, gesturing toward the leather binder resting on the shattered plate. "Would you like to open that folder and explain the $5 million life insurance policy to your prominent friends? Or would you prefer to wait for the federal agents gathering at the perimeter of my estate?" Audrey stared at the black binder, her lungs heaving with frantic, shallow gasps. The realization that there was no escape route, no hidden wealth, and no lingering reputation finally crushed her. She looked past me toward the grand arched windows lining the ballroom walls. Through the glass, she saw the undeniable pulsing glow of red and blue emergency lights, beginning to illuminate the towering oak trees outside. The trap had permanently closed, but the cornered predator searched the silent room for one last desperate maneuver. The pulsing red and blue emergency lights bleeding through the arched ballroom windows painted Audrey in harsh, alternating colors. Her gaze darted around the cavernous room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. The crushing weight of the moment stripped away her polished, aristocratic veneer, revealing the terrified, fragile woman hiding underneath. She reached out a trembling hand toward the state senator sitting to her left. She opened her mouth, attempting to summon the charming, persuasive voice she had utilized for decades to manipulate the Virginia elite. The senator did not offer a comforting hand. He stared at the shattered porcelain resting on the silk tablecloth. He looked at the thick black binder containing the irrefutable evidence of her domestic embezzlement and the horrific life insurance plot. Then he looked at the flashing emergency lights outside. A seasoned politician recognizes a sinking ship instantly. He stood up, brushing an invisible piece of lint from his tuxedo jacket, and took a pronounced, deliberate step away from her table. His wife followed suit, pulling her expensive cashmere wrap tightly around her shoulders. The social quarantine was immediate and absolute. A heavy, agonizing silence stretched across the gala. The irony of the evening hung thick in the perfumed air. Audrey had titled her annual philanthropic gathering "Integrity in Financial Leadership." She had gathered the wealthiest donors in the county to raise funds for underprivileged youth while secretly plotting the murder of her daughter-in-law to cover her own massive corporate theft. The staggering hypocrisy, tasted like ash. The towering mahogany doors at the rear of the hall swung open with a violent, echoing crash. Agent Collins stepped across the threshold. He did not wear a tailored tuxedo. He wore a dark, federal windbreaker emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of his agency. A dozen armed marshals flanked him, forming a rigid tactical wedge. The heavy thud of their combat boots against the imported marble floor replaced the delicate notes of the string quartet. They marched straight down the center aisle, parting the sea of wealthy socialites like a dark, relentless tide. Audrey tried to straighten her posture. She attempted to summon the haughty, indignant matriarch persona she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. She raised her chin, forcing a defiant glare as the federal agents surrounded her center table. "Excuse me," Audrey hissed, her voice trembling with fabricated outrage. "This is a private charity event. You are trespassing on my property." Collins did not flinch. He did not lower his voice to spare her dignity. He projected his words, allowing the accusations to bounce off the crystal chandeliers and reach the ears of every influential guest in the room. Audrey Harper Collins announced, pulling a folded warrant from his jacket pocket. "You are under arrest." He recited the charges with brutal, clinical precision. Grand larceny, wire fraud, interstate corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit murder. Every single syllable struck the audience like a physical blow. The wealthy donors gasped. Disgusted whispers erupted from the back of the room, traveling forward like a shockwave. Men in expensive suits turned their backs. Women covered their mouths in horror. The elite society Audrey had spent her entire existence trying to impress was now looking at her with pure, unadulterated revulsion. She was no longer a queen. She was a monster, exposed in the bright, unforgiving light. A female marshal stepped forward, grabbing Audrey by the arms. The matriarch struggled, pulling away from the officer. "How dare you touch me?" she shrieked, her aristocratic accent disintegrating into a panicked wail. The marshal twisted Audrey around with effortless practice strength. Cold steel handcuffs clamped securely over her wrists, snapping shut with a sharp metallic bite. The rigid metal snagged the clasp of her heirloom pearl necklace. The ancient silk thread snapped. Dozens of pale iridescent spheres cascaded down her emerald gown. They bounced across the hardwood floor, clicking rapidly as they rolled under the shoes of the disgusted onlookers. It was the physical manifestation of her crumbling empire. The federal agents marched her down the center aisle. Audrey wept openly, her makeup running in dark streaks down her pale cheeks. She begged the passing guests for help, but no one met her eyes. She was led out of the grand ballroom, shoved into the back of an armored government vehicle, and driven away into the dark Virginia night. I stood near the head table, watching the taillights fade down the winding driveway. I maintained a quiet, steady posture, embodying the ultimate realization of silent power. I had not shed a single tear. I had not raised my voice. I simply illuminated the dark corners of her life and let her own greed orchestrate her destruction. The narrative shifted away from the sprawling country estate, plunging into the sterile fluorescent purgatory of a federal holding facility in downtown Alexandria. The air inside the detention center smelled of harsh chemical bleach and stale sweat. Derek shuffled down the long linoleum corridor. He wore the same linen shirt he had purchased for his extravagant Cancun getaway, now stained with grime and dried perspiration. Heavy iron shackles bound his wrists and ankles. The Mexican authorities had processed his extradition with brutal efficiency, treating him like unwanted cargo. He possessed no money, no passport, and no influential friends to bail him out. He was a broken, terrified man, stripped of his arrogant delusions. A burly corrections officer shoved Derek into a reinforced glass holding cell. The heavy pneumatic door slid shut, locking with a definitive magnetic thud. Derek stumbled forward, catching himself against a cold stainless steel bench. He looked up, blinking against the harsh overhead lights. Sitting on the opposite end of the bench was Paige. Her designer silk blouse was wrinkled and torn near the collar. Her face was entirely devoid of the flawless makeup she usually wore, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She glared at Derek, her expression twisted with a venomous, hateful rage. She blamed him for her capture. If he had not panicked and called me from that Mexican jail, the feds would never have located her Richmond penthouse in time. Derek backed away from her, pressing his shoulders against the cinder block wall. The tension inside the small cell crackled like exposed electrical wiring. A few minutes later, the heavy pneumatic door hissed open a second time. 2 female guards escorted an older woman into the confined space. It was Audrey. She wore a bright orange canvas jumpsuit. Her hair hung in a chaotic, tangled mess around her face. She looked 20 years older than the woman who had hosted the gala just hours prior. The guards removed her handcuffs and stepped back out, sealing the glass door behind them. Audrey looked at her son. Derek looked at his mother. Paige stared at both of them with profound disgust. The 3 architects of my ruin were now caged together inside the exact same system. They possessed no leverage. They held no wealth. They had no one left to manipulate. The brilliant corporate spy, the arrogant logistical pawn, and the murderous aristocratic matriarch had formed a perfect circular firing squad. Their mutual greed had orchestrated their collective downfall. They would spend the next several decades locked inside federal penitentiaries, blaming each other for the catastrophe they had built with their own hands. Back at the Virginia country estate, the ballroom remained frozen in a state of collective shock. The elite guests whispered among themselves, unsure if they should flee the premises or wait for instructions. The string quartet had packed their instruments and departed. I stood alone beside the shattered dinner plate. I reached down and picked up the thick, leather-bound audit report. I brushed a small, jagged shard of porcelain from the dark material, smoothing the cover with the palm of my hand. The evidence had served its purpose perfectly. A young catering manager approached me. He wore a crisp white tuxedo jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he held a silver serving tray. He looked around the chaotic room, his eyes wide with nervous uncertainty. "Excuse me, ma'am," the young man stammered, swallowing hard. "Should I instruct the kitchen staff to begin clearing the tables? Should we close the bar and ask the guests to leave?" I turned slowly to face him. I surveyed the massive room, the towering floral arrangements, the crystal chandeliers, and the rows of impeccably dressed socialites now belonged to my domain. I was the primary lien holder. I held the deed to the land and the walls surrounding us. The aristocratic matriarch was gone forever. I offered the nervous manager a calm, reassuring smile. "No," I replied, my voice carrying a warm, melodic authority. "Please inform your staff to keep pouring the champagne. Bring out the next course. We are going to celebrate tonight." The manager blinked, his confusion evident. "But who is paying for all of this?" he asked. I tucked the leather binder under my arm, looking out over the sprawling, opulent ballroom. "I own the house now," I said, "and the party is just getting started." The Virginia landscape shifted, shedding the oppressive humidity of summer for the sharp, crisp clarity of late November. The dense foliage rolling along the Blue Ridge Mountains turned to vibrant, striking shades of amber and rust. I stood behind the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office, overlooking the slow, steady current of the Potomac River. The Department of Defense had not merely reinstated my previous security clearance. They recognized the lethal precision of my forensic tracking and the flawless architecture of my defense. The agency promoted me to a senior directorship within the Federal Oversight Division. I no longer spent my weekends untangling the sloppy, chaotic bookkeeping of a single, ungrateful defense contractor. I now commanded a division of 30 elite financial analysts hunting systemic corporate corruption across the entire eastern seaboard. The heavy silver identification badge resting against my tailored blazer felt less like a bureaucratic burden and more like a well-earned shield. The justice system operates with a slow, grinding certainty that eventually crushes those who try to outrun it. The trio of architects who engineered my ruin were currently navigating the brutal reality of federal prosecution. Paige attempted to leverage her stolen corporate intelligence for a reduced prison sentence, but Agent Collins had already secured the encrypted servers, rendering her bargaining chips entirely worthless. She was facing decades of hard time for interstate espionage. Derek remained locked inside a high-security detention center, awaiting a trial he could never afford to win. His overworked public defender advised him to plead guilty to the lesser charges, but his towering pride refused to let him accept his pathetic reality. He spent his days sitting in a concrete cell, stripped of his tailored suits and his leased sports cars. And Audrey sat in a similar bleak facility, stripped of her heirloom pearls and her aristocratic delusions, facing a towering mountain of wire fraud and conspiracy indictments. I did not keep the sprawling colonial estate. Living inside the walls built by her vanity held no appeal to my pragmatic nature. As the primary lien holder holding the defaulted debts, I authorized a ruthless, expedited liquidation of the entire property. A high-end commercial auction house cataloged the antique mahogany furniture, the imported Persian rugs, and the expensive oil paintings Audrey had hoarded for decades to project her illusion of superiority. The local Virginia elite who had once attended her lavish charity galas returned to the manicured grounds with bidding paddles, eager to pick the bones of her shattered empire. I attended the auction standing quietly in the back of the crowded pavilion. I listened to the rhythmic chant of the auctioneer and the sharp, definitive strike of the wooden gavel. The proceeds from the massive estate sale cleared the fraudulent debts she had accumulated over the years and funded the federal restitution ordered by the prosecuting judges. Her generational legacy was dismantled, piece by piece, boxed up and shipped away in unmarked delivery trucks. The towering white pillars and the grand ballroom were sold to a corporate developer who planned to level the historic structure and build a modern tech campus. I left the auction early, leaving behind nothing but an empty, echoing plot of land. I returned to my quiet sanctuary in Alexandria. The county clerk officially expunged the forged second mortgage from the municipal registry, restoring the pristine financial equity I had built over 10 diligent years. The brick structure belonged to me, free and clear of their toxic influence. I walked through the silent hallways, trailing my fingers along the freshly painted walls. Months ago, I had spent a terrifying evening in this exact space, frantically paying a tired locksmith to drill fresh brass deadbolts into the heavy oak doors. I had operated out of a desperate survival instinct, trying to build a physical fortress against an unseen enemy. That suffocating fear was gone. I no longer relied on brass cylinders and iron latches to feel secure in my own home. I held the master digital keys to my entire existence. My biometric security grid hummed a low, steady rhythm, safeguarding a life that was finally impenetrable. I sat at the marble kitchen island, watching the early morning light filter through the wooden blinds. I reflected on the chaotic week that started with a fabricated text message. For 7 years, I had poured my energy into a hollow marriage, acting as the silent structural support for a man who deeply resented my competence. I had convinced myself that managing his profound flaws was an act of quiet devotion. I had accepted the subtle, sharp insults from his mother and the feigned, shallow sympathy from his friends, because I believed endurance was synonymous with strength. I was wrong. The betrayal orchestrated by Derek Page and Audrey was not a tragedy. It was a surgical extraction. Their profound greed provided the exact catalyst I needed to sever the parasitic connections draining my potential. They thought they were burying a quiet, practical bureaucrat who would fold under the pressure of a government raid. They never realized they were planting a seed. The ordeal stripped away the compromises I had made to keep the peace, forcing me to step into the true measure of my own authority. I did not lose a husband, or a best friend, or a respectable family. I discarded a heavy anchor that was dragging me into the abyss. The digital clock on the stainless steel oven displayed 6 a.m. I poured a fresh cup of dark roasted coffee, the rich, earthy aroma filling the warm kitchen. My personal cell phone rested on the granite counter, the screen illuminated with a sudden crisp chime breaking the peaceful silence. I glanced down at the glowing interface. It was an automated notification originating from a federal prison telecommunications exchange. The system displayed a truncated preview of a text message sent from an inmate attempting to initiate contact. It was Derek. The preview line showed a frantic, desperate plea, begging for 5 minutes of my time, promising he had changed and asking for one last chance to explain his actions. He was searching for one last remaining thread to pull, hoping the wife he had so callously discarded might still harbor a shred of pity. He was seeking a lifeline from the very woman he had tried to drown. I did not open the message. I did not read the rest of his pathetic, manufactured apologies. I felt no lingering anger, no sorrow, and no lingering curiosity about his miserable state of mind. The man sitting in that federal holding cell was a ghost to me. I pressed my thumb against the smooth glass screen, swiping the notification to the left. I tapped the bright red deletion icon, wiping the text from the server forever. I followed the prompt by permanently blocking the facility routing exchange, ensuring his digital voice would never reach my device or my consciousness again. The screen faded to black, leaving my phone silent and undisturbed. I picked up my warm coffee mug and walked out onto the back patio. The crisp morning air kissed my cheeks, carrying the faint scent of fallen pine needles. In the distance, the peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains caught the first brilliant rays of the rising sun, painting the horizon in vivid, spectacular strokes of gold and violet. The world felt vast, open, and entirely mine. The war was over. I had navigated the treacherous labyrinth of their deception, dismantled their fraudulent empires, and reclaimed my sovereignty without ever sacrificing my dignity or raising my voice. I took a deep, cleansing breath, letting the cool Virginia breeze fill my lungs. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the road ahead did not feel like a heavy obligation I had to manage. It felt like a pristine blank canvas waiting for my instruction. I was finally, permanently, and irrevocably free. If this journey resonated with you tonight, take a moment to reflect on the silent burdens you might be carrying for people who do not value your formidable strength. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to reclaim your own peace of mind? Drop a comment below and share your experience with us. We have so many more stories of resilience, justice, and triumph waiting for you. So make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful moment like this. Let us keep walking this path together. The ashes of a ruined empire rarely smell like smoke. More often they smell like expensive perfume, polished mahogany, and the sterile air of a federal holding cell. When we examine the catastrophic collapse of the dynasty built by Audrey and dismantled by Faith Myers, a saga of corporate espionage, forged mortgages, and chilling betrayals, it is tempting to view it merely as a thriller of financial retribution. But beneath the surface of offshore accounts and decrypted routers lies a far more profound, quiet tragedy. It is a tragedy not of stolen millions, but of a devastating failure in parenting. It is a cautionary tale about the darkest shadows of family responsibility and the true cost of the American legacy. For generations, traditional American culture has venerated the concept of building a better life for our children. We are conditioned to equate parental success with the accumulation of generational wealth, pristine reputations, and the ability to shield our offspring from the harsh, unforgiving edges of the world. We build towering colonial estates. We secure legacy admissions. We strive to provide a life free from the struggles we ourselves endured. But what happens when the desire to protect mutates into the compulsion to control? Look at Audrey and the son she raised. Derek was not born a coward, nor did he enter the world as an entitled, arrogant pawn willing to sacrifice his own wife to save his skin. He was molded into that shape, year by year, by a mother who fundamentally misunderstood the assignment of parenthood. Audrey believed that family loyalty meant erasing her son's mistakes. When he failed, she smoothed it over. When his business faltered, she quietly siphoned funds to artificially prop him up. She taught him that consequences were for other, lesser people. In doing so, she stripped him of the one tool every child needs to become a functional, honorable adult: accountability. There is a profound danger in prioritizing the facade of a traditional family structure over the moral integrity of the individuals within it. Honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness are not inherited traits. They are deliberate daily practices modeled at the kitchen table. When parents prioritize the appearance of success over the reality of character, they raise children who view the people around them not as human beings, but as utilities. Derek viewed his wife Faith as a utility, a practical, boring machine designed to balance his ledgers and subsidize his country club lifestyle. He lacked the emotional awareness to recognize her humanity, let alone her brilliance, because he was never taught how to see beyond his own manufactured reflection. We often hear that a parent's greatest duty is to protect their child from pain. Society praises the fierce, unyielding parent who will tear down any obstacle in their child's path. But here is a truth that runs counter to everything we are taught about unconditional love. Unrelenting protection is not love. It is a slow, quiet sabotage. True love requires the agonizing courage to let your child fall. It demands that you stand back and watch them experience the sharp, stinging impact of their own poor choices. When we insulate our children from failure, we do not make them safe. We make them dangerous. We send them out into the world as fragile, hollow adults, equipped with immense entitlement but zero moral compass. A parent who refuses to hold their child accountable is actively weaponizing that child against the innocent people they will one day marry, employ, or befriend. Audrey thought she was saving her son by providing him with a scapegoat. Instead, she handed him the very shovel he used to dig his own grave. Raising children with fairness and emotional intelligence means looking them in the eye and telling them hard, uncomfortable truths. It means valuing the quiet, unglamorous work of integrity over the loud, flashy performance of success. It means teaching a child that their worth is not tied to a bank account or a family name, but to how they handle the moments when no one is watching and no one is there to bail them out. If we fail in this, if we prioritize the inheritance of land over the inheritance of honor, we are not building a legacy. We are merely building a beautifully decorated cage destined to eventually lock our children inside. It is easy to point fingers at the villains in a story, to marvel at their hubris, and applaud their eventual downfall. But stories like these serve as a mirror held up to the quiet corners of our own lives. They ask us to examine the foundations of the homes we are building and the values we are silently transmitting to the next generation. We explore these complex, deeply human dynamics because they resonate with the unspoken truths of our own families. If this exploration of legacy resilience and the true meaning of family responsibility has stirred something within you tonight, I invite you to join our storytelling community. Please subscribe and follow Sarah Told Stories. We have so many more narratives waiting to challenge your perspective, tug at your heart, and keep you company in the quiet hours. But as the glow of the screen fades and the silence of your own home settles around you, consider the lessons woven into the fabric of the tragedies we leave behind. We spend our entire lives trying to leave a piece of ourselves in the world, terrified of being forgotten. We groom our children to carry our names, our businesses, and our pride. Yet the true measure of our existence is never found in what we leave for our children, but in what we leave in them. The most terrifying realization a parent can face is not that their child might fail. The true horror is realizing that your child might succeed using the exact broken compass you handed them. You must ask yourself, as you look at the faces of the people you are raising, are you teaching them how to walk their own path, or are you just teaching them how to wear your favorite mask? The answer, much like the quiet justice that inevitably arrives in the dark, is something you alone have to live with.